On her wedding anniversary, Stephanie, an obstetrician, made 2 decisions. First, divorce. Second, an abortion. Additionally, Stephanie set a countdown timer on her phone for leaving. Within 30 days, she needed to accomplish these 2 things and completely escape this failed marriage. After making the decision, Stephanie took advantage of a lull between prenatal checkups to schedule an abortion for herself 5 days later. A ding sounded. Just as her phone notified Stephanie of the successful appointment, the hospital's number calling system beeped. Number 32 Jonas, please proceed to the examination room. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. At her desk, Stephanie looked up in shock to see a familiar figure supporting a woman as they walked toward the examination room. The man had deep-set eyes and stood tall in his white captain's uniform, none other than the golden pilot of China Southern Airlines, her husband Jonas, and the heavily pregnant woman he was cradling with such care was named Phyllis. Stephanie had once seen Jonas's photo of Phyllis in his wallet, a tiny passport-sized photo, its corners already worn and curled from being frequently taken out and fondly touched. It was then that Stephanie learned Jonas and Phyllis had fallen in love in high school, broken up 5 years ago, and Phyllis had gone abroad to marry someone else. On the very day Phyllis registered her marriage with another man overseas, it was also the day Jonas proposed to her. Amidst swirling emotions, Jonas and Phyllis entered the examination room. Our eyes met. Jonas also flashed a momentary look of surprise in his eyes, seemingly not expecting to encounter Stephanie here. His thin lips parted slightly as if wanting to say something, revealing an uncharacteristically nervous expression. Yet Stephanie said nothing, asked nothing, only the trembling hand gripping her pen faintly betrayed her anguish and shock. Just then, Phyllis affectionately looped her arm through his. Jonas, isn't it too exhausting for you to bring me straight for a checkup after leaving the airline? No, Jonas soothed Phyllis as he handed the registration slip to Stephanie. Stephanie suppressed the sting in her eyes, took the slip, and rose to examine Phyllis. Phyllis seemed completely unaware that she and Jonas were married, clutching Stephanie's white coat while coquettishly pleading, "Doctor, I'm scared of pain, please be gentle." Stephanie was about to explain that routine prenatal checkups aren't painful. Jonas cut in first with a concerned reminder, "Please go easy, Ms. Stephanie. Phyllis has been frail since childhood, fears pain, and is allergic to penicillin." In an instant, Stephanie's words lodged in her throat like a fishbone, stuck, aching, impossible to swallow or dislodge. She simply closed her mouth and silently proceeded with the examination for Phyllis. As the scanner swept over, Stephanie discovered that Phyllis was already 8 months pregnant, nearing her due date. Her heart felt as if it were being squeezed, and Stephanie could barely catch her breath. Yet, even as the examination concluded, she never once questioned Jonas. Jonas seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Before leaving, he turned back and gave Stephanie a deep look, as if surprised by her calmness. After all, in the past, Stephanie would question any woman who appeared by Jonas's side, but now, Stephanie was tired. Whether it was this marriage or her relationship with Jonas, she no longer wanted to exhaust herself trying to maintain it. What she found even more unacceptable was that Jonas had a love child older than her own. When Stephanie returned home from work that evening, she was surprised to see Jonas at home. He seemed to have just arrived, still wearing his pilot's uniform and holding a gift box. "I brought you a present from Paris." As he handed the gift box to Stephanie, he unusually offered an explanation. "The person I took for a checkup today was just a friend. I happened to run into her at the airline and gave her a ride since it was on my way. She was pregnant and alone. So it wasn't convenient for her. The child has nothing to do with me. Don't misunderstand." "I see." Stephanie wasn't sure whether she should believe him. After all, when it came to Phyllis, he had been hiding things from her and lying to her all along. Stephanie suppressed her surging emotions and looked up at him, wondering how to tell him about her decision to divorce and terminate the pregnancy. Jonas's phone rang first. The caller ID showed Phyllis. Jonas glanced at the screen, quickly silenced the phone, and said instead, "There's an emergency meeting at the airline. If you're tired, go to sleep first, don't wait up for me." Without waiting for Stephanie's consent, he turned to leave after speaking. Stephanie made up her mind in an instant, grabbed Jonas, and handed him the divorce papers that had been prepared on the table. "Jonas, I've set my eyes on a flat by the riverside." He deceived her, and she deceived him. Only then was it fair. Jonas was in a hurry to leave, flipping directly to the signature page and quickly signing, "Buy it if you like." Then, he gently kissed her forehead, "Wait for me to come back." As his words faded, the sound of the door closing echoed simultaneously. Stephanie finally looked at the already signed divorce agreement with reddened eyes, slowly placing a hand on her abdomen. "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy can't bring you into a world without love. Stephanie rested her hands on her belly as she leaned against the sofa. For the first time, she felt how vast and empty this home was, so silent it became terrifying. Stephanie had thought divorcing Jonas would be difficult. Checking the countdown on my phone, I realized only a single day had passed. Not only had she scheduled the abortion, but she'd also signed the divorce papers. Lost in thought, her phone screen suddenly lit up with a new friend request notification. Stephanie suddenly had a strong intuition. The person adding her was Phyllis. Indeed, she had just pressed agree when she saw the other person update a WeChat Moments post. "Thank you for working so late to decorate our new home for me and the baby. From now on, we'll have a fresh start." In the accompanying photo, Phyllis, with her pregnant belly protruding, was gently embraced by the man's strong hand around her swollen abdomen. Stephanie glanced at the time on her phone, 12:37 a.m. Jonas was moving house for his first love. Their wedding anniversary had passed, yet from start to finish, Jonas seemed to have forgotten, not mentioning a single word. The phone screen reflected Stephanie's reddened eyes and the tears shimmering endlessly within them. She smiled self-deprecatingly and gave Phyllis's social media post a like. After calming down for a while, Stephanie didn't wait up late for Jonas as usual. She casually placed the gift from Jonas into the display cabinet, washed up, and fell straight asleep. As for that gift, Stephanie could guess with her eyes closed it was Givenchy's Elle Interdit. It was also Phyllis's favorite perfume. She thought Jonas probably wouldn't come back tonight. But unexpectedly, at 3 a.m., the mattress beside her sank, and Jonas pulled her into his arms. "Why did you fall asleep without waiting for me this time?" Stephanie inhaled the pungent scent of women's perfume on him, her voice strained. "I was tired today, after 5 years of marriage." This was the first time she had lost her passion for Jonas. Jonas stiffened slightly as he held her hand, whispering soothingly, "I'm sorry, I was too busy yesterday and forgot our anniversary. I'll pick you up after work tonight and we'll go out to eat as compensation, okay?" She had once been infatuated with Jonas's tenderness, but now, hearing it again, her heart didn't flutter in the slightest. Her mind was filled with one thought. Did he also comfort Phyllis like this? Okay. Stephanie suddenly felt grateful for the darkness, which hid her reddened, stinging eyes. Jonas uncomfortably furrowed his brows. "Been in a bad mood lately. Why so cold?" Cold? This level of coldness couldn't even compare to Jonas's treatment toward her. Probably just tired lately. Stephanie wearily turned over, her back to Jonas. "Let's sleep." Jonas lost his temper for a moment, throwing off the covers and storming out again, from beginning to end. He never noticed Stephanie's pregnancy test report placed by the bedside. As the cold air seeped through the uncovered bedding and gripped Stephanie's heart, she lay awake until dawn, unable to sleep. The next day, Stephanie endured her exhaustion and got up as usual to go to work. In the evening, when her colleague asked if she was working overtime, Stephanie remembered Jonas's promise to have dinner together and replied, "No," but just as she left the hospital, she received Jonas's call cancelling their plans. "Sorry, the airline is making me work overtime tonight. We'll have to reschedule our dinner." Perhaps because she had been let down too many times, Stephanie had grown accustomed to it. Okay, suppressing the dull ache in her chest, she hung up the phone and headed to the nearest mall. Unexpectedly, as she placed the freshly weighed vegetables into her shopping cart at the mall, a familiar male voice rang out from nearby. "You're pregnant, you can't eat lychees." Stephanie turned her head and saw Phyllis, along with Jonas, who had claimed to be working overtime. Jonas reached over to take the lychee from Phyllis's hand and placed it back. "You can have as many as you want later, but not now." His voice was cool, yet his tone carried gentle indulgence. Though Phyllis insisted on eating it, she obediently let Jonas put the lychee back, clearly enjoying being restrained by Jonas. She was so happy she even jumped up and tightly hugged Jonas's arm. "Jonas, you're really so gentle. You'll definitely be a great dad someday." Stephanie felt a pang in her heart, thinking of the child in her womb. If Jonas knew she was pregnant, would he take care of her and look after her like this too? At that moment, Phyllis suddenly waved at Stephanie. Stephanie, you're here too." She stepped forward and warmly took Stephanie's hand. "Last time at the hospital for the prenatal checkup, I didn't get a chance to thank you. Yesterday, Phyllis added her on WeChat and posted a bragging, provocative moment. Today, Phyllis pretended not to know her here. Stephanie felt somewhat uncomfortable, frowning slightly as she withdrew her hand. She hadn't used any force. Phyllis yet suddenly stumbled backward a step. Jonas quickly stepped forward to steady Phyllis, sharply questioning Stephanie. "What are you doing? Phyllis is pregnant." Stephanie turned pale, looking at Jonas in disbelief. Does he love Phyllis this much? So much that he can't even see through such a low-level scheme? And Phyllis is pregnant, does that make her innocent? Stephanie digs her nails into her palms. What about you? Didn't you say you were working overtime? Jonah's expression darkens, a flicker of guilt flashing through his ink-black pupils. Phyllis curved her lips slightly, feigning confusion and surprise as she asked, "Oh Jonas, so you and MS Stephanie know each other?" Stephanie glanced at Jonas, noticing his evasive gaze and tightly pressed lips. He clearly had no intention of explaining their relationship to Phyllis. Stephanie smirked mockingly, her calm tone laced with deeper disappointment. "We don't." Then the cart moved away. As Jonas passed by, Stephanie saw the surprise and anxiety in his eyes. What was he surprised about? Wasn't it him who didn't want to acknowledge their relationship? Stephanie pushed the shopping cart forward, feeling a gaze persistently following her from behind, until Phyllis cried out in pain, "Jonas, my stomach feels a bit uncomfortable. Don't be afraid, I'll take you to the hospital." The next moment, Stephanie noticed that the gaze fixed on her had vanished. She turned her head back. Jonas and Phyllis were already gone, leaving only that lonely shopping cart, as neglected as she was, abandoned in place. Stephanie smiled self-deprecatingly, pushed the shopping cart to checkout, then carried 2 large bags of groceries to hail a taxi in the night breeze. Returning home, she prepared 3 dishes and a soup to set on the table. Perhaps eating alone was too lonely. She only took a few bites before losing her appetite, her body alternating between chills and fever, as if coming down with a cold. Stephanie put down her chopsticks and collapsed onto the bed as soon as she reached the room. In her drowsy haze, Jonas returned home, his cold, dry hand pressed against her forehead. "How did you get a fever?" The gentle and affectionate voice made Stephanie daze for a moment, instinctively grabbing his sleeve. "You're back. Weren't you accompanying Phyllis to the hospital?" Jonas found fever medicine from the bedside first aid kit, then poured Stephanie a glass of warm water and brought it to her lips. "I just dropped her off, not accompanied." "Be good. Take the medicine. You'll feel better after taking it." Perhaps influenced by his thoughtfulness and pampering, Stephanie rarely showed weakness. "No, I don't want to take medicine." She was pregnant and couldn't take medicine casually. She subconsciously touched her lower abdomen, thinking Jonas would ask her why she wasn't drinking now. She would confess to him that they already had a little baby on the way. She didn't know if it was subconscious neglect towards her or some other reason. Jonas only withdrew his hand from her grasp with a cold expression, placing the medicine on the bedside table. "As a doctor, you should understand better than anyone what it means to conceal one's illness for fear of treatment." With just one sentence, he shattered Stephanie's last glimmer of hope. She desperately wanted to ask Jonas, was he this indifferent toward Phyllis too? But in the end, she merely curled her lips into a bitter smile. "Jonas, I don't need you to teach me how to be a doctor." Stephanie had always been gentle and had never talked back to Jonas like this before, so much so that Jonas stood frozen for a long moment before snapping back to reality as if remembering something. "Are you upset that I didn't go to dinner with you today?" Stephanie felt a lump in her throat, the words still stuck there. Jonas's phone rang. He picked it up and glanced at it before leaving the bedroom to answer the call. The only one who could make him answer a call like this was Phyllis, but if he couldn't let go of Phyllis, why bother being attentive in front of her? At that moment, Jonas walked in again and sat by the bed, asking, "Can pregnant women take cold medicine freely? What can they take to relieve cold and fever?" Stephanie felt her heart skip a beat, thinking he had discovered her pregnancy. Hesitating over how to broach the subject, then she heard Jonas say, "Phyllis has caught a cold and is suffering from severe morning sickness. I came to ask you." Stephanie's head throbbed even more intensely at that moment, her words stuck in her throat like a fishbone. Jonas, seeing that Stephanie remained silent, sat by the bed and searched on Baidu, "What should I do about severe morning sickness?" After looking it up, she forwarded the post to someone named Phyllis, adding a thoughtful reminder, "Pregnant women shouldn't take medicine casually. I can't get away right now, so take extra care of yourself." He said he couldn't get away, but aside from handing Stephanie a pill, he made no further move. He said he couldn't get away, yet he kept glancing down at his phone to check if Phyllis had sent any new messages. His hesitation was not silent. Stephanie didn't want to see any more, closing her eyes to continue resting. She was exhausted, not just physically weary, but her heart felt as if it had plunged into a bottomless abyss. When she woke again, Stephanie gazed at the hazy sky, still somewhat dazed. Only that cold pill lay by the pillow. Jonas was gone. She glanced at her phone, 24 days left until departure. At 5 in the morning, Phyllis posted a new moment. "You're always there when I need you most." In the photo, Phyllis leans against Jonas's shoulder, receiving an IV drip in the hospital, her eyes brimming with unmistakable happiness and pride. Meanwhile, Stephanie glances around the house, taking in the overwhelming loneliness and solitude, a stark contrast to Phyllis, Stephanie's eyes well up with bitterness once more. If he couldn't let go of Phyllis, then why did Jonas marry her in the first place? Was it just to prove that his time and love could be divided between two people? Stephanie didn't want to look anymore. Just then, she received a text from the hospital, asking if she had time to come in for an abortion procedure the next day. Stephanie's heart suddenly tightened. To avoid affecting her work, she directly requested 2 days off from the hospital. Then, with trembling hands, she replied, yes. After replying, she then scheduled an appointment at the Civil Affairs Bureau to collect her divorce certificate and bought a plane ticket on TravelSky. The destination of the ticket was Paris, and the date was the day after she would receive her divorce certificate. Stephanie had always wanted to visit Paris. Right after getting married, Jonas also said, Stephanie, when we have time, let's go to Paris for our honeymoon. But their jobs kept them both increasingly busy. The honeymoon plans were forgotten. But it didn't matter. After getting the divorce papers, she could go anywhere she wanted, all by herself. Just as the phone popped up with a notification of successful flight ticket purchase, Jonas returned. He walked into the room naturally, touched Stephanie's forehead, and asked softly, the fever's gone. Are you still feeling unwell? In silent understanding, Jonas didn't mention when he had left. Stephanie didn't ask where he had gone either. She just pursed her lips and instinctively asked, if I'm feeling bad, will you stay with me forever? Jonas was momentarily stunned. Seemingly not expecting Stephanie to ask such a question, she had always been excessively independent and strong-willed, so he had long grown accustomed to her saying, I'm fine now. Stephanie naturally didn't expect an answer from him either, because, truth be told, she wanted to ask Jonas, always shuttling between two women, doesn't he get tired? Watching his tense lips, Stephanie let out a long breath. Just kidding, I don't need you to stay with me all the time. She was clearly smiling. Jonas yet somehow sensed that Stephanie no longer needed him. Jonas's heart trembled as he stiffly raised his arms to embrace her. We're married, how could I not stay by your side? I'll always be with you, until our hair turns white, until we share the same grave. In the past, Stephanie might have been deeply moved, but now, with just over 20 days left before her departure, such vows were merely words to be heard and forgotten. She would never believe them again. Sure enough, Jonah's good behavior didn't last more than a few days. After a while, he couldn't stay put anymore. He would only sit at home for a short while before finding excuses to go out. When there were only 20 days left until her departure, Stephanie also went to the hospital, preparing for surgery. Unexpectedly, while discussing her abortion plan with a colleague, she ran into Jonas and Phyllis, who were there for a checkup. The two sat on the hospital bench. Phyllis stroked her belly with a dreamy expression, occasionally turning her head to say a few words to Jonas. Jonas's sharp features softened, and he occasionally responded, a stark contrast to his usual dismissive attitude toward her. Stephanie's colleague beside her noticed and couldn't help but remark, with parents like them, their child will probably be gorgeous too. Maybe. Stephanie's heart felt as if it had been sharply pierced. She turned away in disarray and followed her colleague into the operating room. After completing the pre-surgery checkup, her colleague told her, the baby is healthy. Maybe you should talk to the father again. Don't do something you'll regret later. Regret? If Jonas had any regrets, he wouldn't be accompanying Phyllis for her checkup now. Stephanie shook her head, took the abortion form, and signed it herself in the family member section. By the time the last stroke of the pen was done, her hand was trembling uncontrollably. Half an hour later, Stephanie lay on the cold operating table, watching her colleague use a dilator to open the entrance before breaking the fetus apart with instruments and suctioning it out. Though the anesthesia numbed her pain, her heart felt as if it were being torn apart by knives. Tear after tear streamed from her hollow eyes. She seemed to hear the cries of a sweet little child whispering in her ear, Mommy. During the final scrape of the procedure, her heart felt hollowed out in an instant. She felt it with crystal clarity. The last bond between her and Jonas had vanished. There was no room left for reconciliation between them. Stephanie closed her eyes, letting tears soak the pillowcase. She lay numb in the hospital for an entire day, while that Jonas who had promised to stay by her side was absent for the very same day. In the evening, Stephanie endured the pain and got up alone to go home. Just as she left the hospital, she saw Jonas waiting at the entrance, holding a large bouquet of roses. When he saw her come out, Jonas handed her the roses. Happy anniversary, honey. Stephanie paused for a moment, took the flowers silently, and got into the car. Usually, when she met Jonas, she would chatter away about hospital happenings and gossip. Now she remained silent, leaving only a deathly stillness in the car. Jonas grew restless. At a red light, he unusually took the initiative to ask, I didn't prepare an anniversary gift this time. Is there anything you'd like? There was a time Stephanie wanted many things, But whenever she enthusiastically mentioned them to Jonas, his responses were always indifferent. Gradually, she lost the desire to confide in him. Stephanie stared fixedly out the car window. I signed up for a new parents' online course. Can you attend with me? Jonas frowned slightly, gripping the steering wheel as he explained, Phyllis and I are just friends. Don't overthink it, and don't be upset. Stephanie didn't respond, merely giving a soft in acknowledgement. Jonas didn't expect Stephanie to be so indifferent, his expression turning cold. Then why did you sign up for such a class? Why, that was Stephanie's previously enrolled class, where she had once held countless hopes, hoping for her child to be born. But now, she had personally given up her child. Stephanie looked at the myriad lights outside the window, her eyes already reddened. If you don't want to, you don't have to ask me what I want for our anniversary. Jonas choked up and fell silent. The weight of silence pressed down on Stephanie's heart like a boulder. When they arrived at the destination, only then did she realize Jonas had claimed this was for their anniversary. Yet the restaurant he booked was still Phyllis's favorite. She stepped out of the car, suppressing the helplessness in her chest, but forgot her handbag had been left inside. Jonas intended to bring it to her when exiting, but upon picking up the handbag, he spotted the abortion clinic form inside. Jonas held his breath and reached for the abortion form. Stephanie's impatient call came from outside. Jonas snapped back to reality, remembering how Stephanie had repeatedly said she wanted a child with his nose and his eyes. If Stephanie were really pregnant, how could she bear to abort it? Jonas picked up the handbag and caught up with Stephanie. You forgot your bag. What's this abortion form inside? Stephanie felt a pang in her chest but feigned indifference as she took the bag. It belongs to a hospital patient. Jonas nodded in understanding and didn't press further. The dishes arrived at their table swiftly. Stephanie looked at the table laden with greasy, spicy food, her stomach churning without any appetite. What's wrong? Jonas failed to notice her pale complexion as he reached to serve her a piece of fish fillet. Isn't this your favorite? Stephanie felt a sudden tightness in her chest and calmly set down her chopsticks. You remembered wrong. It's not me who likes it, it's Phyllis. Jonas's hand holding the chopsticks froze mid-air, his thin lips parting slightly. Sorry. He reached for the menu again. Order whatever you like. I'll remember next time. After 5 years of marriage, if Jonas had ever paid attention to her, he would know what she liked and disliked. But his heart was already engraved with Phyllis's preferences, leaving not a shred of space for her. Now that she had decided to leave, his belated next time didn't seem so important anymore. No need to trouble yourself. This will do. Jonas frowned slightly but said nothing more, and Stephanie didn't pick up her chopsticks again either. The atmosphere was stagnant like a pool of dead water. Much like their relationship and marriage, Stephanie was on maternity leave. Having taken a long break from work, as if to make amends, Jonas came home early these days, showering her with bags and jewelry as if they cost nothing. Stephanie merely accepted them calmly, without a trace of joy in her eyes. Don't you like any of these? Jonas rubbed his temples, no longer wanting to bother guessing Stephanie's preferences. Just tell me what you want, anything to make you happy. Stephanie asked for nothing. She compiled a new dad checklist based on online courses for first-time parents. I just want you to do these things with me. Jonas glanced down indifferently. Fine, whatever makes you happy, he agreed, and true to his word, he followed through. The first thing on the first day, Stephanie handed the formula and bottle to Jonas and said, when we have a child someday, you as the father will need to learn how to prepare formula. Jonas kept running into issues, either the water ratio was off or the temperature was too high, yet he wasn't the least bit annoyed. Instead, he was thoroughly enjoying himself. When he successfully prepared the formula for the first time, he turned around excitedly and blurted out, Phyllis, look. When the voice abruptly stopped upon seeing Stephanie, Jonas swallowed hard, trying to explain. Stephanie's eyelashes trembled slightly, unable to even muster a bitter smile. It's fine. Let's continue. Stephanie neither argued nor made a scene, simply lowering her head to check the first box on the list. Upon closer listening, one could detect the tremor in her voice. When the baby grows a little older, we'll need to start feeding him solid foods. Stephanie brought Jonas into the kitchen and instructed him on preparing baby food. First prepare the rice cereal, then add a little mashed potato and a bit of walnut oil. Jonas had never cooked before. But he learned quickly and had the baby food ready in just a few minutes. Stephanie watched as he took a photo and sent it to Phyllis to show the results. Even though her heart had long turned to ashes, Stephanie still felt the irony and a twisted sense of relief. Relieved that she hadn't brought a baby into such a family, and relieved that the child wouldn't have to bear the sins of its parents. Stephanie turned her reddened eyes away and checked off the second item on the list. The next day, the third task for the new father was to prepare safety rails and crawling mats for the baby. Jonas cheerfully agreed to Stephanie's suggestion, carefully selected the materials, and enthusiastically set up a corner in the living room himself. The fourth task was to find a suitable kindergarten for their baby. Jonas tirelessly visited numerous options before finally settling on a bilingual kindergarten costing 120,000 yuan per semester. When making the decision, he held Stephanie tightly and sighed by her ear. Our child mustn't fall behind at the starting line. Whatever she desires, I'll provide it for her. Darling, shall we have a baby? When he said these words, it seemed he genuinely longed to have a child with Stephanie, and truly wanted to build this home together with Stephanie. Yet when Stephanie heard these words, her countdown to departure had only 10 days remaining, but from beginning to end. She never told Jonas about her impending departure. She wanted Jonas to immerse himself in the beautiful dream of a family of 3, because only then, when Jonas learned the truth and the dream shattered, would he, like her, feel pain as if his heart were being gouged out, and care as if pierced by 10,000 arrows. After a busy day, Stephanie patted his arm, signaling that it was time for him to take a shower. Jonas reluctantly let go of Stephanie and went to the bathroom to wash up. Just as he entered, the phone he had casually placed on the coffee table rang. Stephanie frowned slightly but ignored it. Unexpectedly, after the call ended automatically, it rang again. As if determined to get through, Stephanie impatiently picked up her phone and answered the call. Phyllis's coquettish voice coming through the receiver. Jonas, why did it take you so long to answer? My due date is next Wednesday. Will you be there with me then? Stephanie tightened her grip on the phone bit by bit, suppressing the nausea rising in her throat as she glanced at the frosted glass door of the bathroom with a derisive snort. Shall I ask him for you? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Phyllis let out a soft chuckle. I thought you truly didn't care about anything. Phyllis's voice was condescending, dripping with pity for Stephanie. I should thank you for taking care of Jonas these past 5 years. But I'm back now. You should know he only married you to spite me. Stephanie, if you know what's good for you, you should step aside now. Maybe you can still preserve some dignity for yourself. Stephanie's hands clenched tightly on the sofa as waves of cramping pain radiated from her lower abdomen. She could accept love gradually fading and a marriage heading toward ruin. She could even accept 2 people who never loved each other getting married and then going their separate ways. But she couldn't accept that Jonas couldn't let go of his true love while still clinging to her warmth. Where would such good fortune exist? Stephanie pressed her aching lower abdomen, forcing calmness. Phyllis, all you'll ever get are my leftovers. Guess whether Jonas will return your call tonight. With that, she ignored Phyllis's frantic provocation and hung up the phone. Just then, the sound of trickling water from the bathroom stopped. Jonas stepped out of the bathroom, drying his hair as he asked, who was on the phone. Stephanie had no intention of hiding it. Phyllis is due next week and asked if you'd go keep her company. Suppressing the discomfort in her lower abdomen, she fixed her gaze intently on Jonas. Are you going? Jonas paused slightly, casting a worried yet guilty glance at Stephanie. No, why should I go when she's giving birth? I'll stay with you these days. You don't like her after she has the baby. I won't contact her anymore. Stephanie watched his struggle and insincere words, feeling as if her heart had been viciously twisted. Seeing her disbelief, Jonas gently hugged Stephanie again, changing the subject. Darling, when will our baby come? I've already decided. If it's a girl, I'll send her to learn boxing. If it's a boy, Stephanie subconsciously placed her hand on her abdomen, her lips curling into a bitter smile. No, she will never come again. Jonas didn't catch her whisper and asked with a light chuckle. Honey, what did you say? Stephanie took a deep breath, clutching her aching lower abdomen as she asked. I said, if Phyllis had come back on our wedding day, would you still have married me? Jonas' face instantly lost all its radiance, turning pale as he murmured, You knew. Stephanie took a step back, withdrawing from his embrace. Time passed minute by minute. Jonas remained silent, and silence, sometimes, is also an answer. Stephanie's heart sank heavily, plunging into an icy pool. After a long while, Jonas finally gathered himself to speak. She and I were just. But Stephanie no longer wanted to listen. Suppressing the emotions in her chest, she raised her hand to cover his lips. No need to explain to me. As long as your conscience is clear, that's enough. Perhaps it was guilt. Or perhaps something else. That night, no matter how much her phone vibrated, Jonas stayed by Stephanie's side without leaving for a moment. He held Stephanie tightly, afraid that if he loosened his grip, he would lose her. When Jonas gradually fell asleep, Stephanie finally opened her eyes, watching the dawn light seep into the room. When the countdown to departure reached just 9 days, she won the confrontation with Phyllis, yet she lost so completely, because no matter what she did, it seemed impossible to hide the fact that Jonas had Phyllis in his heart. His shopping cart was filled with maternity and newborn clothes ready to be shipped. His phone search history was also packed with, what should new mothers pay attention to during postpartum confinement, what to eat after childbirth, how to choose a maternity nurse. Every action could wound Stephanie's heart deeply. In the following days, Jonas became increasingly busy. He would often rush out after receiving a phone call, saying it was airline business. Stephanie knew these were all excuses, yet she said nothing and asked nothing, until time slipped away unnoticed. Stephanie had completed her postpartum confinement, and it was now the day before they were to collect their divorce certificate. Jonas was rushing out the door again. Honey, the airline has a meeting, I need to head over first. This time, Stephanie unprecedentedly ignored his flustered urgency and stopped him. Jonas, if we had a daughter, what kind of husband would you want her to marry in the future? Jonas, though anxious, he answered without hesitation. Of course, someone who loves her wholeheartedly, cherishes her, and accepts her unconditionally. Stephanie, her fingertips suddenly dug into her palms. What if that person still has a white moonlight in their heart? Divorce, Jonas blurted out. Stephanie turned pale, finally asking the last question weighing on her heart. What if she's pregnant? Jonas immediately furrowed his brow and said sternly, then terminate it. I don't approve of her becoming a single mother. With that said, Jonas spared no more words for Stephanie and turned to leave through the door. Stephanie watched his hurried departure with stinging eyes. Jonas, these were your words, you'd better not regret it. Her words drifted faintly through the room. But Jonas left too quickly to hear a single syllable. Stephanie hadn't expected him to hear anyway. She glanced at the countdown on her phone. In less than 30 days, she had somehow managed to accomplish everything. Perhaps this also meant that she and Jonas were never meant to be. Stephanie silently walked to the bedside, picked up the divorce papers, and took a taxi to the Civil Affairs Bureau to collect the divorce certificate. On the 8th day of the countdown, the moment the green booklet was in her hands, Stephanie let out a deep sigh of relief. It was as if all the sorrow that had been pent up in her heart had dissipated. From now on, she and Jonas would truly be nothing more than strangers. Stephanie invited her old friends out for a meal, treating it as a final farewell. Her best friend Novia rushed to the restaurant, her eyes filled with confusion. You're going to Paris? Such a big decision. Did Jonas agree to it? Wait. Something's wrong. Why do you look so pale? You've lost weight and look so worn out. These days, Stephanie and Jonas have been together day and night. Jonas never noticed anything unusual about her, yet Novia saw it at a glance. Stephanie's heart trembled, the long-suppressed grievances surging like stones colliding in her chest. With reddened eyes, she shook her head and pulled out a little green booklet. Novia, Jonas and I are already divorced. Novia was astonished. So sudden. When was this decided? When was the decision made? Perhaps 3 months ago, when I saw Jonas pick up Phyllis at the airport upon her return, and they kissed passionately, or perhaps 2 weeks ago, when Jonas stayed up all night moving to a new home for Phyllis, forgetting our wedding anniversary, or perhaps just now, when I saw Jonas hurrying to see Phyllis. Seeing Stephanie remain silent, Novia let out a long sigh. What a pity, you've liked him for so long. Stephanie's expression froze momentarily. Jonas truly never knew from beginning to end. Stephanie had a crush on him since high school, but back then, Jonas never noticed her. When she learned about Jonas's blind date, she deliberately created the opportunity to become his match. She walked up to him. It took her 999 steps, but Jonas remained rooted in place, unwilling to take a single step toward her. Stephanie forced a bitter smile as she murmured, "There's always been someone he couldn't let go of in his heart. Rather than enduring this thorn until the bitter end, it's better to cut our losses now. Love may withstand the test of time, but it cannot withstand the reality of betrayal. I still have an entire lifetime ahead of me. I can't hang myself on this one tree of his." Novia never expected this to be the reason. After the initial surprise, she didn't press further. When parting, Novia could only hug her reluctantly. "Keep in touch often when you're in Paris. Don't go disappearing on me." Okay. Stephanie bade a proper farewell to Novia before heading to the hospital again. In the past, she had always come to this hospital to save lives and heal the wounded. This was the place where she had helped countless families welcome new lives. Now it had become the place where she said goodbye to her own child, and where her medical career would end. The director learned about Stephanie's intention to resign and expressed some regret. "Just 2 more years and the institute was planning to evaluate you for a professional title. If you want to come back after resting, you're always welcome." Stephanie's eyes reddened as she pressed her lips together and bowed in gratitude. "Thank you, director." She completed all the formalities and walked out with her resignation papers in hand. Unexpectedly, amidst the bustling crowd in the obstetrics department, she spotted her ex-husband Jonas and Phyllis. Phyllis laughed heartily with Stephanie. one hand holding her belly, the other linked with Jonah's as they walked slowly down the hallway. Meanwhile, Jonas carefully supported her, his handsome face filled with anticipation. All his attention was focused on Phyllis, completely unaware that Stephanie had just brushed past him. And completely unaware that Stephanie had overheard every word of their conversation. Jonas, thanks to you, the baby and I are safe and sound. After I give birth, you can name the baby and let them call you Daddy, okay? And that Jonas, who kept saying he would cut ties with Phyllis after she gave birth. He answered firmly and full of hope. Okay. Stephanie looked ahead, her eyes slowly reddening, tears welled up in her eyes. But she merely paused her steps briefly before striding forward with even greater determination. After all, she had already finalized the divorce with Jonas. From now on, no matter whose child Jonas wants to be a father to, it has nothing to do with her anymore, Stephanie thought. Walking out of the hospital with numb steps, the warm sunlight outside fell upon her, instantly dispelling all the cold. She wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and mustered her spirits to return home. While packing her things, she realized that every single item in this home had been acquired by her, piece by piece, the pillows and mattress, the rugs and scented candles. It was all to help Jonas adjust to the time difference. She visited numerous factories and personally commissioned custom-made items. Jonas never cared about any of it, as if this place were no different from a hotel. Beneath his seemingly gentle exterior lay an even deeper indifference. Stephanie once found warmth in this home. But now only coldness remains. By the time she finished packing, Stephanie had only gathered a few daily necessities, leaving all the luxury items for Novia to handle. As for mementos of her relationship with Jonas, she didn't take a single one. The countdown on her phone showed 7 days remaining. But Stephanie no longer wanted to wait. It wasn't until everything was settled and the clock struck 10 that Jonas finally returned home. Stephanie had just stepped out of the bedroom when she was enveloped in a tight embrace by Jonas. He buried his face in Stephanie's neck, his body still carrying the chill of the night breeze. Darling, we'll have our own children someday too, right? Stephanie stood rigidly in place, letting him hold her without responding. Even with departure imminent, she still couldn't understand. Why can Jonas flirt ambiguously with Phyllis while casually chatting with her about children as if nothing happened? Jonas didn't notice her mood and spoke with unusual tenderness. I'm flying to Paris tomorrow and will have a surprise for you when I return in 3 days. Stephanie didn't care about the surprise he mentioned. All she felt was that Jonas was in high spirits tonight, probably because he'd grown closer to Phyllis again. Stephanie let out a soft hum and reached up to give Jonas a proper hug, consider it a final farewell to her feelings, and to this rather unhappy marriage. The next morning, Stephanie made breakfast for Jonas as usual. Jonas stood tall in his crisp white captain's uniform, his sharp features no longer appearing as stern and unapproachable. But the moment he settled by the dining table, the hospital called abruptly, saying Phyllis was going into labor. Jonas didn't take a single bite, holding his phone with an apologetic look as he turned to Stephanie. Honey, Stephanie forced a smile and began clearing the table. Go quickly, it's truly difficult for her to deliver a child alone without any help. Jonas's eyes instantly lit up, with a faint smile playing at the corners of his eyes and brows. He hugged Stephanie, kissed her forehead, and said, "Wait for me, honey." With that, Jonas hurried away. Stephanie watched his retreating figure for a long time, only lowering her gaze when her eyes grew sore. She dumped all the breakfast into the trash, silently turned off the countdown on her phone, and placed the divorce agreement and certificate on the nightstand. It took only 23 days to reach the end. She had completed what she once thought she would never experience in her lifetime. Stephanie, with red-rimmed eyes, hailed a taxi to the airport, arriving to find the terminal bustling with people. The display screen announced a delay for the flight to Paris. The reason for the delay was that Jonas was currently waiting outside the delivery room, praying for Phyllis and her baby's safety. Stephanie found a seat and happened to overhear fellow passengers chatting. How long will this delay last? If it's too much, maybe we should switch flights. Stephanie softly murmured, it won't be delayed for long, because she had just seen Phyllis's updated WeChat moments. After all the twists and turns, it's still you, my Mr. Jonas. In the photo, Jonas's large hand cradled the baby's delicate little foot, while Phyllis lay weakly beside them. It was clearly a picture of a happy family of 3. Stephanie lowered her eyes, feeling a faint pang in her heart that vanished as quickly as it came. Exactly 1 hour later, the announcement came. Passengers bound for Paris may now board. Stephanie put on her hat and boarded the plane, settling into her first-class seat as she quietly waited for takeoff. 10 minutes later, the plane took off. Jonas's cool, deep voice came through the captain's announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, my wife has gone into early labor today. I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience my personal matter has caused to your journey. He paused, his voice brimming with joy. I've prepared compensation and gifts for our passengers as a token of appreciation for your understanding, Jonas shared with unrestrained delight. Completely unaware, Stephanie was quietly leaving him aboard the very flight he was piloting, embracing a brand new life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Our aircraft has now reached cruising altitude and is expected to arrive in Paris on schedule at 10:04. With that, Jonas put down the microphone and skillfully piloted the Boeing 737 through the thick clouds. 15 minutes later, the plane landed smoothly at Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. Inside the terminal, Jonas dragged his pilot's suitcase, listening to his crewmates chatting beside him. Co-pilot Ken walked alongside him, already rambling about missing his wife. Jonas listened to his complaints with a blank expression, yet inexplicably began missing Stephanie himself. The thought had barely formed when, amidst the bustling crowd of the terminal, he suddenly caught sight of a familiar figure passing through customs. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, momentarily dazed, but when he tried to get a closer look, the person had already walked away. Beside him, Ken noticed his abrupt halt and asked in confusion, "Mr. Jonas, did you see someone you know?" "No. Just a case of mistaken identity." Jonas averted his gaze, yet inexplicably felt a pang of unease. It couldn't be her. Stephanie just saw him off at the airport yesterday. How could she possibly be in Paris now? Ken teased. "Don't tell me you're missing your wife too." Jonas shot him a glance but remained silent. After walking a few steps, he still pulled out his phone and glanced down. Aside from a few news alerts and spam messages, there was nothing else on the phone screen. The chat box labeled wife remained silent, and his conversation with Stephanie also stopped at yesterday. In the past, during every flight, from takeoff to landing, Stephanie would always send him many messages, sometimes a puppy she saw on the roadside, sometimes a new dish she was trying, and in the end, she would ask if he had landed safely. But now, Jonas lowered his eyes and sent Stephanie a message saying he had landed safely. After a while, he asked where she was. Stephanie didn't reply. Jonas glanced at the time. It was still 6 in the evening back home, so it was normal for Stephanie to be working overtime at the hospital and not have time to check her phone. Stepping out of the terminal, Ken asked, "Want to grab a bite to eat together?" Jonas put away his phone and calmly refused. "No, I have something to do." "All right then." Ken was already used to his cold and taciturn nature, so he said goodbye and left first. Jonas frequently flies the Paris route, and for convenience, he directly bought an apartment in the 14th arrondissement of Paris. When the taxi arrived, Jonas pulled out his phone to check WeChat. Nearly an hour had passed, yet Stephanie still hadn't replied to his message. Jonas frowned slightly, and the unease he had just suppressed surged up again. Just then, a text message came through. "Mr. Jonas, the auction you commissioned has been successfully completed. The auction items will be transferred to you at the agreed time." It was a message from the auction consignor. Jonas lowered his long lashes slightly, the cold glow of the screen illuminating his eyes that now held a faint smile. 2 days ago, he had stumbled upon a 10-carat pink diamond ring on an auction website, a truly rare find, and the auction happened to be in Paris. This was the anniversary gift he had prepared to compensate Stephanie, and also the surprise he planned to give her upon returning home, back when they got married in haste. He couldn't give Stephanie a grand wedding, and even the wedding ring didn't fit properly. She should like this gift. As he thought of this, Jonas was hesitating whether to call Stephanie when his phone suddenly rang. A flicker of disappointment crossed Jonas's eyes as he saw the unfamiliar number on the caller ID. He lifted his hand to hang up, but the other end persistently called back. When the 5th call came, Jonas's brows furrowed slightly. His fingertip finally swiped across the screen. And the moment he answered, he heard Phyllis's soft, pitiful voice. "Jonas, have you blocked all my contact information? Even if you're going to be with Stephanie properly, we can at least still be friends, can't we?" Listening to the woman's tearful accusations, Jonas's eyes no longer held even a ripple of emotion. His voice was calm as his thin lips parted. "Phyllis, I made myself clear to you that day. There's no need for us to stay in contact. I've already helped you with everything you asked. Phyllis, we're even now." "No, Jonas, you can't do this to me." Phyllis, before she could finish speaking, Jonas had already hung up the phone. He set down his phone and leaned against the balcony railing, gazing down at the sprawling panorama below as his thoughts gradually drifted away. That day Phyllis had just given birth, and he went to help with the paperwork. Phyllis woke up, looked at the baby, and smiled as she raised her eyes to him. "It's a little boy, Jonas. Would you like to give him a name?" Jonas lowered his gaze to the tiny infant, but his thoughts were of Stephanie. Would their future child be a boy or a girl? Would they be mischievous or quiet? What would life be like once they had a child? But no matter what, at the very least, he should be a decent father. After all, he had already studied up on it, even picking out the child's middle school in advance. He would definitely be able to take good care of Stephanie and the child. Jonas thought this, the corners of his lips lifting slightly as he blurted out, "Let's name him Lyle. As for the nickname, that would be up to Stephanie to decide later." Phyllis looked at him, her smile deepening. "It sounds wonderful. The baby will surely love it. Let's call him Lyle from now on." Jonas snapped back to reality and frowned. "You've misunderstood. That was the name I chose for the child between me and Stephanie." Phyllis froze momentarily. "Jonas, do you really intend to have a child with her?" Jonas's silence instantly unsettled her. She grasped Jonas's hand, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I know you don't love her at all. Marrying her was just to spite me. But I've returned now, Jonas. We can be together again. This time I won't leave you anymore." "I don't think that's necessary." Jonas looked at her bloodshot eyes and calmly withdrew his hand. "When you came back, I was confused too about what I truly felt for you. But now, I've figured it out." Jonas lowered his gaze at her, his calm eyes carrying detachment, rather than feelings for you. It was more about regret and unwillingness towards the past. "I already have someone I love now, and I intend to spend my whole life with her. What we had is already in the past. I've already booked the postpartum care center for you as you requested. Get some good rest. I've done all I can to help. Let's not see each other again after this." That day, after making everything clear, Jonas finally felt a sense of relief the moment he walked out of the hospital doors. Just then, the notification sound from his phone chimed, instantly pulling Jonas's wandering thoughts back to the present. These were clothes he had bought in advance for their future child and for Stephanie to wear during her pregnancy, which had just arrived. Jonas lowered his gaze, overwhelmed by an intense longing for Stephanie. He suddenly wanted to hear Stephanie's voice, and before he realized it, he had already dialed her number. Yet all that answered him was the relentless sound of a busy tone. "Sorry, the number you dialed cannot be answered at the moment." Jonas furrowed his brows and tried calling again, only to be met with the same mechanical busy tone echoing in his ears. What's going on? Stephanie had never missed his calls before. Jonas stared at his phone screen, remembering how he'd once forgotten the time difference and called her at 4 a.m. her time. She'd still answered sleepily, asking what was wrong. But now his calls sank like stones into the sea. Was she busy with surgery, or attending a hospital meeting? Jonas couldn't think of any other possibilities. He glanced at the time, desperately suppressing his restless anxiety, waiting. Once Stephanie finished her business, she would surely call him back. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Jonas opened the door to find the auction consignor standing outside, handing over the purchased item and documents requiring his signature. After signing, Jonas paid the remaining commission. The auction consignor also knew the value of this pink diamond. Seeing Jonas bid so generously, he smiled and asked, "Mr. Jonas, are you bidding for your beloved?" Jonas couldn't help but imagine Stephanie wearing this ring, the corners of his narrow eyes crinkling with amusement as he gave an affirmative hum. "Your beloved is truly fortunate," the consignor remarked with admiration, offering his blessings before taking his leave. Jonas gazed at the diamond ring in his hand, experiencing for the first time the impatience of one who longs to return home. But by the next day, Stephanie still hadn't contacted him. Not even replying with a single word on WeChat, Jonas finally sensed something was wrong. He called Stephanie again, only to find the number had been disconnected. Why was it disconnected? Jonas stared at his phone in stunned disbelief. That surging wave of longing was instantly replaced by endless unease and panic spreading through him. He tried every possible way to reach out, but couldn't contact Stephanie no matter what. The mechanical female voice from his phone drained away all his remaining rationality. Jonas couldn't wait for his scheduled flight home. He applied to swap shifts with another crew team still in Paris and bought the earliest available ticket to rush back. By the time the plane landed back home, it was already 3 a.m. Jonas moved at top speed, not stopping for a moment as he raced home. When he opened the door, the house remained exactly as he'd left it, completely unchanged. Nothing had changed. Yet it completely amplified Jonas's unease. Has Stephanie not returned home since the day he flew to Paris? He hurried into the bedroom and instinctively opened the wardrobe. Only his clothes remained. That morning, his outfit had been ironed by Stephanie as usual and placed directly on the bed bench, which was why he hadn't noticed. He turned around and surveyed the surroundings. More than that, Stephanie took away more than just clothes. Almost every trace of her existence in the house had been completely erased, as if she had completely vanished from his life. Only the gifts he had given Stephanie, big and small, remained. She hadn't taken a single one. Jonas finally realized something. His rapid breathing gradually froze. his face turning pale as he sat on the edge of the bed, when suddenly he noticed a document placed on the nightstand. He still remembered it was that riverside apartment Stephanie had once fancied. He reached out to pick it up, and the moment he flipped it open, his pupils constricted. It wasn't a house purchase contract at all, but a divorce agreement. What made it even more ironic was that his name was written in the bottom right corner, signed by his own hand. Jonas flipped through the pages in disbelief when a thin sheet of paper slipped out and fluttered down to land at his feet. It was unmistakably a pregnancy test result. In an instant, Jonas felt his blood run cold. Stephanie was pregnant. The date on the prenatal checkup form showed it was from 3 months ago, exactly during Phyllis's return to the country. Yet throughout these 3 months, he had been completely unaware of her pregnancy. No, he wasn't completely unaware. For the past 3 months, Stephanie has treated him differently than before. On a few occasions, Stephanie vomited violently. Lately, she's taken to wearing loose dresses. Not only that, but she's also suddenly asked him to learn how to be a dad in advance. But he had been unsettled by Phyllis's sudden return to her home country and had never paid attention to it before. Everything before him clearly showed Stephanie's disappointment in him, and by the time he realized it, she had already left. Yet only now did he truly understand his own heart, deciding to live well with her from now on and nurture their home together. Jonas clutched the thin sheet of paper tightly, every word on it seeming to weave into a net that tore at his heart. People always realize the value of something only after they've lost it. Jonas stopped working and frantically searched everywhere for Stephanie. After going around in circles, when Jonas had searched all the places Stephanie might have gone, nearly turning the entire city upside down, he suddenly remembered the figure he saw that day at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Was it really just his imagination? Jonas dared not dwell on it, yet an intuition compelled him to immediately check the passenger manifest from his Paris flight that day. When he saw Stephanie's name, it struck him like a bolt from the blue, nearly stealing his breath away. But why? He had already planned to confess his feelings when giving her that gift. He had said he wanted her to wait for him to return. But he never expected Stephanie would already be leaving on the very day she saw him off for his flight. Jonas used nearly all his connections and resources to search for and contact Stephanie, but the world is too vast, and Stephanie had countless ways to hide from him if she wanted to, yet he still had to find her, find Stephanie. 3 months later, Paris, France. Stephanie sat on a bench in the park square, holding a handful of breadcrumbs, feeding the doves of peace. A gentle breeze stirred as she lowered her gaze, the corners of her lips carrying a quiet, serene smile. Golden leaves drifted down as she scattered the last breadcrumbs on the ground, immediately drawing a gathering of grey-white pigeons. These past 2 weeks were probably the most carefree and relaxed time she'd experienced since leaving Jonas. She tried many things she had never experienced before, like skydiving, rock climbing, scuba diving, for the first time. She viscerally and profoundly realized how close freedom truly was to her. After feeding the pigeons, Stephanie lingered a while longer in the breeze before finally getting up to leave. She booked a flight back home for the next day. After all, her life center of gravity remained in her homeland. Besides, after 3 months abroad, she still preferred the scenery back home. The next day, Stephanie boarded a flight back to her home country. The seat beside her was occupied by a strikingly handsome man dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his features sharp and profound, exuding an air of noble elegance. His mere presence was enough to draw attention. Stephanie was observing when suddenly a loud cry for help came from the direction of the airplane restroom. "Is there any medical personnel on board? There's a pregnant woman in premature labor here, and she's in critical condition." Without almost any hesitation, Stephanie immediately stood up and hurried over from the first-class cabin. "I'm an obstetrician. I can help." Stephanie arrived at the plane's restroom to find the pregnant woman had already given birth. The pregnant woman looked nervous, seeing Stephanie as if grasping her last lifeline, her voice trembling. "Doctor, please, save my child." Stephanie looked down to see the mother carefully cradling a palm-sized amniotic sac containing the placenta and newborn. Stephanie frowned slightly, then calmly asked, "How far along are you?" "Only 26 weeks. Stephanie immediately tensed up. Just then, 2 other doctors on the plane rushed over upon hearing the news. However, they weren't obstetricians, so they could only assist Stephanie in the emergency rescue. With limited medical resources at 10,000 meters altitude, Stephanie had no choice but to put on gloves and tear open the amniotic sac. Yet the newborn's entire body was pale and its limbs ice-cold. The situation looked grim. "Bring a hot water bottle and a blanket, quickly," Stephanie shouted urgently while performing first aid. In the cabin, everyone's hearts were in their throats, all eyes fixed on Stephanie. Only when the newborn's heart rate gradually stabilized did everyone collectively exhale in relief. In first class, Morton glanced at Stephanie, who was nearby, wiping a thin sheen of sweat from her forehead. Soon, the gaze was withdrawn again. The plane made an emergency landing at the nearest airport. 3 doctors took turns performing chest compressions on the newborn. Stephanie also didn't dare to let her guard down for a single moment. After the plane's emergency landing, Stephanie accompanied the newborn to the hospital in an ambulance. From an altitude of 10,000 meters to the hospital, she continued chest compressions for nearly over an hour. Only after the newborn was sent to the emergency room did Stephanie finally relax, her hands hanging by her sides trembling from numbness. It wasn't until both the newborn and the mother were stabilized that Stephanie felt reassured enough to leave, rushing back to the airport to board another flight arranged by the airline. By the time the plane landed safely, Stephanie didn't return home until 2 a.m. She had just stepped out of the shower when her phone chimed with a message notification. She glanced at it. It was a friend request from an unfamiliar WeChat account. Stephanie hesitated for a moment before tapping accept. After adding her, the other person immediately sent a message. "Stephanie, what on earth have you done? Jonas is completely obsessed with you now, he won't even see me." Stephanie never expected that after blocking Phyllis, the other woman would still persistently find ways to contact her. Remembering the official relationship announcement she'd seen on Phyllis's social media before leaving, she smiled bitterly and replied, "Weren't you and Jonas already together long ago? I've already made room for you, what more could you possibly be dissatisfied with?" She had clearly complied with their wishes by facilitating her relationship with Jonas, yet Phyllis remained visibly displeased. "Stephanie, you're doing this on purpose, deliberately making sure Jonas can't forget you." Stephanie read Phyllis's message, finding it laughable while feeling a secret thrill in her heart. "Don't you want to be both the unforgettable white moonlight in his heart and his rightful wife? Phyllis, greed invites divine retribution." After sending this message, Stephanie no longer wanted to engage with Phyllis and blocked her again. She recalled her experience on the plane when returning to China. Stephanie still felt that she couldn't let go of her mission and dream as a doctor. She called the department head, expressing her wish to return to the hospital and resume her position. Only when the department head welcomed her back did Stephanie finally breathe a sigh of relief. Early the next morning, Stephanie drove herself to the hospital to return to duty. As the car was just starting at a major intersection traffic light, a parent with a child, head bowed looking at their phone, didn't notice they had stepped onto the crosswalk as the light turned red. The child ran laughing across the crosswalk. About to collide with the car, Stephanie's pupils contracted as she quickly swerved the steering wheel and slammed on the brakes to avoid them. Unfortunately, another car happened to be passing through the intersection at that moment. There was only a loud bang. The fronts of the 2 cars scraped past each other with a loud crash. Fortunately, the other driver reacted in time. Stephanie also braked promptly, preventing any major accident. Stephanie had just caught her breath when she spotted the Maybach emblem on the opposite car, and her expression grew even more grim. The parent who had run the red light held their child in panic, the child crying and clinging tightly to the parent's leg. The parent didn't recognize it as a Maybach, but one glance was enough to tell it was an expensive luxury car far beyond their means to compensate for. They stood frozen in sheer terror. At the major intersection, vehicles shuttled past, and passers-by didn't stop. They merely cast sympathetic or pitying glances their way before continuing on. Stephanie hurriedly opened the car door and stepped out to inspect the damage. She saw that the opposing vehicle's front end was slightly scraped and dented, but clearly her own BMW, with its shattered headlight, had suffered more severe damage. This was her first time being involved in such an accident, and for a moment, she was utterly flustered, although it was to avoid pedestrians. She was the one who scraped the car after all. Determining liability would depend on the traffic police. If she were primarily at fault, how much would she have to pay? Would her savings even be enough to cover the Maybach's damages? As she was lost in anxious thoughts, the Maybach's door suddenly opened. A well-dressed, elegant man in a suit stepped out from the passenger seat. After closing the door, he glanced at the long scratch left behind. He frowned slightly. But instead of confronting Stephanie, he turned to the parent who had run the red light with their child and asked in a low voice, "How could you be so careless with your child? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" The parent's face turned pale with fright. Holding the crying child, they repeatedly apologized, promising to be more careful in the future, but they truly couldn't afford to pay compensation and begged the man to be merciful and not demand any. Bowing deeply with the child in their arms, they apologized desperately, a pitiful sight beyond words. But this incident was ultimately caused by him running a red light while distracted by his phone. Stephanie couldn't really defend him for that. As an ordinary person, One might never earn enough in a lifetime to cover the compensation for a Maybach, so she still quietly spoke the truth. He probably can't afford to pay. Hearing this, the man gave Stephanie a complicated look and was about to say something when the rear window rolled halfway down. Stephanie looked up, a flash of surprise in her eyes. Through the gap in the half-open car window, she caught sight of a man's deep, sharp brows and cold eyes, along with his pale, rosy lips. It was actually the man who had sat beside her on the plane yesterday. The man parted his thin lips slightly, his voice cool and low. "Mark." The called man turned around and leaned closer to the window. "Mr. Morton," the person in the back seat spoke up. "We're going to be late." Mark nodded understandingly and looked at the parent. "It's all right now, especially since you have a child with you. Just be more careful in the future." Stephanie knew it was all the doing of the man in the back seat. The parent immediately felt as if granted amnesty, uttered a few words of thanks, and hurriedly left with their child. Mark then got into the car as well, showing no intention of discussing compensation with her. Everything was simply because of a single word from the man referred to as Mr. Morton. Anyway, it could be said that she had encountered good people. Stephanie snapped back to reality, took out her phone to call a tow truck, and arranged to have the car repaired first. Left with no choice, she explained the situation to her supervisor in advance and then took a taxi to the hospital. Who would have thought that so many ups and downs could happen in just one morning? Stephanie gazed at the scenery flowing backward outside the car window, her emotions still far from calm. The cold wind whistled through the half-open car window. Stephanie yet she felt an inexplicable warmth in her heart. Little did she know, fate always plays the cruelest tricks. Stephanie had barely stepped out of the car when she collided with Jonas, who was just walking out of the hospital entrance. The moment their eyes met, Jonas's eyes instantly reddened, his face slightly pale. He strode toward Stephanie, his eyes brimming with uncontrollable longing, barely restrained to avoid losing composure on the spot. "I thought you'd avoid me forever." Stephanie, after the initial surprise, met his gaze with nothing but calm. "I've done nothing wrong, nor do I have any reason to avoid you. I just don't want to have anything to do with you anymore." Word by word, in an instant. It seemed to drain all of Jonas's strength, his eyes reddening at the corners. The hospital entrance was bustling with people, their expressions hurried and gloomy, most too preoccupied to spare them a glance, though an occasional look was still cast their way. Jonas held Stephanie tightly in his arms, as if trying to merge her into his very bones, resting his head against the crook of her neck, his voice muffled. "Yes, it's all my fault. I wronged you, but I've completely cut ties with Phyllis. Please forgive me, okay?" These days without Stephanie, no one would prepare lunchboxes for him in advance anymore, nor remind him to eat on time. He worked until now when his stomach trouble landed him in the hospital. Yet there's no one to thoughtfully care for his meals. No one would iron his clothes for the next day anymore, nor carefully coordinate his outfits. And no one would leave a single light on at home, waiting for his return, alone in the empty house, staring at all the things bought for Stephanie and their future baby. He felt like he was going mad. "I've been searching for you all this time. Stephanie, I've missed you so much. I didn't know you were pregnant back then. But all those maternity and baby items I bought were indeed meant for you." Stephanie stood still, watching him quietly without responding. She had never seen Jonas so humbled before. The man she once placed on a pedestal, seemingly out of reach, now stood before her, pleading for her forgiveness in a low voice. Stephanie felt only a deathly calm. The more she had once longed for Jonas to show her tenderness and care, the more bitterly ironic these words now sounded to her. No matter how much she loved him in the past, she has truly let him go now. After a long moment, she Jonas's embrace and spoke calmly yet firmly. "Don't bother. Jonas, we're over." Jonas stared at her in disbelief, his lips pressed tightly together, voice trembling imperceptibly. "No, I've finally come to understand my own heart. Stephanie, it's you I love, the only one I want to spend the rest of my life with." Stephanie frowned and cut him off coldly. "Jonas, I've loved you for 5 years. Don't you think it's a bit too late for you to realize this now? You only married me to provoke Phyllis. That restaurant you always took me to was actually Phyllis's favorite. The moment Phyllis returned to the country, your heart and eyes were completely fixated on her. You were even distracted." Jonas froze. He hadn't expected Stephanie to have known everything all along, yet she had said nothing. Stephanie glanced at him and continued. "Besides, even without Phyllis, our marriage would have reached its end sooner or later. I no longer want to struggle to maintain this one-sided marriage." Her eyes remained utterly calm, devoid of ripples, yet they pierced Jonas's heart like a sharp blade. Jonas's gaze trembled slightly. "I know we rushed into marriage without proper preparation. I've wronged you, but at least, give me one more chance to make it up to you, please, all right?" Stephanie looked at him with a faint smile. I just need you to do one thing for me. Jonah's eyes lit up. As long as it's within my power, just name it. Stephanie also knew he had always been generous when it came to spending on her, but that's not what she wanted. All I need is for you to disappear from my sight completely from now on, and never disturb me again. Jonah's face grew paler with each word she spoke. No, everything but that. His voice was hoarse. The last two words trembling slightly. Stephanie fell silent. Jonas clenched his jaw. He hadn't slept a full night in ages, dark circles shadowing his bloodshot eyes. His entire appearance haggard, a dull ache twisted in his stomach again, his brows furrowed deeply, thin lips pressed into a tight line, his stern brows softened as he gazed at Stephanie, his eyes seemingly flowing with the glow of sunset. Jonas pulled a velvet box from his pocket containing a top-quality pink diamond ring, deftly steering the conversation away from the topic. This is the anniversary gift I wanted to give you as compensation, the same surprise I originally intended for you. Stephanie didn't take it. A flash of astonishment crossed her eyes, devoid of any joy, tinged instead with irony. Wasn't the news you meant to tell me back then your official decision to be with Phyllis? Jonas startled, his long brows furrowing tightly. Of course not. I had already decided to end everything with her. How could I possibly agree to be with her? Stephanie suddenly understood that day. Phyllis's social media post was only meant for her to see. But what good did it do to realize the misunderstanding now? Jonas, she no longer cared who she ended up with. After a long pause, she let out a light laugh. The gift is too precious. Mr. Jonas, you should keep it for yourself. I have work to do, so I won't keep you company. With that, Stephanie stepped around him and walked straight away. As they brushed past each other, Jonas tightly grasped her wrist and asked in a whisper, "Then, is our child still there?" When he asked this, he had already given up hope. Stephanie's resolute attitude had made everything clear, yet he still couldn't accept it. Stephanie withdrew her hand directly and looked at him calmly. Jonas's heart sank bit by bit in this silence. He knew the answer now. In a dazed moment, Stephanie turned and walked into the hospital, never looking back at him again. The stomach pain seemed to be getting worse. It hurt so much that Jonas stood frozen in place, bending over with his lips clenched so tightly he could almost taste blood. Yet the overwhelming pain showed no sign of relenting. Until the sky grew dark, Jonas staggered home step by uneven step, numb like a walking corpse. A figure stood at the door, as if waiting for him for a long time, cradling a sleeping infant less than a month old in their arms. Yet Jonas merely glanced at them before walking straight past. Phyllis's smile gradually froze on her face. "Won't you even say a word to me now? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just get back together with your nod? She doesn't love you anymore." Jonas stopped in his tracks but didn't turn around. The silvery moonlight poured down, dappling through the mottled tree shadows onto him, rendering him strikingly handsome and aloof in the haze, unfathomable and untouchable. "Jonas," she grabbed his sleeve, her voice hoarse. "Stephanie is deliberately toying with you, tormenting you, don't you see that?" Jonas finally turned around slowly and, under Phyllis's disbelieving gaze, spoke word by word. "I know, and I'm willing." The silent night was so quiet you could almost hear the sound of breathing. "But Jonas, the one you've always loved is me, isn't it?" Phyllis whispered accusingly. Each breath came like the ebb and flow of tidal waves, wildly screaming with unwillingness. "You married her without love in the first place. Isn't this divorce a relief for you?" Jonas looked at her quietly, freeing his hand from Phyllis's grasp as his thin lips parted slightly. "Phyllis, there's something I made perfectly clear to you from the very beginning." His voice was colder than a winter's night, so rational it felt icy. Phyllis gazed at Jonas before her, someone who should have been so familiar, yet now felt utterly alien. "I will absolutely never get a divorce." Phyllis stood frozen for a long moment before shaking her head mechanically. But why? I don't understand, Jonas. Why would you throw away your entire life staying with someone you don't love?" "Phyllis, this is no longer a question of love or not," Phyllis said. Jonah's eyes showed no ripple of emotion, calm to the point of lifelessness. "Being with her is about building a home together, no longer just the simple give and take of a romantic relationship." Jonah's eyes were slightly red at the corners. The cold evening wind blew against his dry eyelids, bringing a sting of bitterness. He should have had a good life with Stephanie. If he hadn't gone to take care of Phyllis while Stephanie was pregnant, if he could have recognized his own heart earlier and treated her better, if he could have been honest with Stephanie from the beginning about everything with Phyllis, then he should have been able to come home now and see Stephanie lying lazily on the sofa waiting for him, with freshly cooked steaming dishes on the table. When the child was born, he could have prepared milk formula, made baby food, played games with the child, while Stephanie sat on the sofa, smiling as she recorded videos of them. But now, he has nothing left. "But Jonas, I can also build a home with you. We can have our own baby too. I promise I'll do better than that person. And I'll never leave you again. I'll do anything you want me to." Phyllis's emotions grew increasingly agitated, tears streaming down her face as her voice rose in pitch. "I don't want anything else. I just want you. You're all I have left." Her slender figure stood in the shadows. Phyllis had reached this point with her words. Already standing at the edge of a cliff, she staked all her chips, just to make Jonas her support again, even at the cost of losing everything. Phyllis believed that with such sacrifices for Jonas, he would surely be moved. After all, they had once loved each other. But a baby's cry interrupted her thoughts. The child was thoroughly awakened by her raised voice and began crying incessantly. Jonas lowered his long lashes, obscuring the emotions in his eyes. She could only hear his deep, pleasant voice reminding her, "The child is crying." Jonas turned to leave, and only then did Phyllis snap out of her daze. But she had no time to comfort the child, hastily chasing after Jonas to grab his arm, her eyes brimming with aggrieved tears. "I understand now, Jonas. You don't want a divorce. I get it. I shouldn't have appeared before Stephanie. It's all my fault. From now on I'll just be an unassuming lover standing behind you, never again disrupting your relationship with Stephanie." Can't even that be allowed? Jonas's eyes showed not the slightest ripple of emotion. When he glanced at her, annoyance surfaced in his gaze for the first time. "There's just no reasoning with you." Jonas frowned deeply, his voice flat. "Why bother with someone like me?" He stood rooted to the spot, past memories flooding his mind. Thinking back on everything Stephanie had done for him during their 5 years of marriage, he realized the things he'd done for her could practically be counted on one hand. He had never truly cared for her. So reaching this point today was nothing less than the consequences of his own actions. He understood this perfectly well in his heart, yet that intense resentment still burned within him like an unquenchable fire. Jonas seemed to space out for a moment, then shook his head with self-mockery. When he lowered his gaze to Phyllis again, his eyes had regained their cruel, unruffled calm. "I've made too many mistakes already, but no matter what, there was never any possibility for us." He glanced at the wailing child, perhaps remembering that he and Stephanie had once had a child of their own, before letting out the faintest sigh. "At least try to comfort your child and be a responsible mother." Phyllis seemed to suddenly remember that she had a biological child who was crying and clinging to her clothes. Depending on her, she crouched down, choking back sobs as she tried to comfort the child. But tears welled up in her eyes first. Stephanie had once mocked her, saying that her greed would bring divine retribution. She thought she had captured Jonas's heart and had always been fearless, but only at this moment did she realize how utterly wrong she had been. Jonas returned home, sat on the sofa, and looked at the longevity lock and silver bracelets on the coffee table. Originally prepared for the child, everything in the house related to the child had been personally acquired by him, little by little. But now, what should have been the warmth of a home was only a cold emptiness. Jonas raised his hand to cover his face. The house was so quiet that even the faintest sob sounded painfully clear. 1 week later, the night was as deep and impenetrable as undiluted ink. Stephanie had just stepped out of the hospital after her shift when her phone rang. She glanced at it and answered the call. "Hey, Mom, when are you taking time off?" "The day after tomorrow." "Why?" Stephanie sounded puzzled. Stephanie's mom rarely asked about her work. There was a pause on the other end of the line before her mother laughed and said, "Why, of course it's about your future. You're not planning to stay single forever because of that guy, are you?" "No," Stephanie choked up. Of course she wouldn't remain single forever for Jonah's sake. But that didn't mean she was ready to jump into a new relationship right away. She tried to be tactful. "Mom, I'm not thinking about that so soon. It's too late for second thoughts. I've already picked someone for you." Stephanie's mom sighed, cutting her off, her tone firming. "Don't worry, my judgment is never wrong. He comes from a good family, handsome too, my best friend's son. We know his background inside out. I'd never let you settle for less. You're meeting him the afternoon after next, and that's final. Don't you dare stand him up." Stephanie's mom dropped this line and hung up the phone. Stephanie didn't even have time to utter a single no. There was no way out. Stephanie might not want to accept this arrangement, but at the very least, she couldn't stand the other person up. It would also be the perfect opportunity to make things clear face to face. But what Stephanie never expected was that the blind date her mom had arranged for her turned out to be the man sitting in the back seat of that Maybach that day. The man's gaze fell upon her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before they quickly returned to calm. Stephanie let out an awkward chuckle as she sat down, lamenting this ill-fated encounter. She hesitated, unsure whether to introduce herself first or apologize. After all, she still remembered the scrape she'd caused with his car. Before she could decide, the man spoke first, his deep, pool-like eyes fixed on Stephanie as he extended a pale, slender hand. "Morton." Stephanie hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. "Stephanie, I remember you." Morton suddenly curved his eyes slightly, their briefly clasped hands parting as quickly as they'd touched. His voice was cool and deep, like jade beads shattering against Stephanie's ears. As she withdrew her hand, the lingering warmth of the man's touch seemed to remain on her palm, making Stephanie's heartbeat inexplicably quicken by 2 beats. "Oh," Stephanie forced a dry laugh, never expecting he'd also remember her embarrassing moment from that morning. She held a cup of warm water on the table, carefully choosing her words to apologize. "I'm really sorry about that morning. I didn't mean to." "Not that one," Morton smiled, clearly not bothered at all about the damaged luxury car. "It's about that day on the plane when you saved a premature baby." Stephanie was stunned. At the time, she had been solely focused on saving the person and hadn't noticed anything else. Morton never expected that the figure he casually glimpsed on the plane that day would linger in his memory until now. Even less did he anticipate so many serendipitous encounters between him and Stephanie. First time meeting. "I'm not sure what dishes you prefer." Morton handed the menu to Stephanie. "Just order what you like. No need to be polite." His voice was deep and pleasant, carrying an inexplicable sense of calm that soothed the heart. Stephanie had originally planned to state her purpose as soon as she sat down, then leave with effortless grace. Yet somehow, she found herself browsing the menu instead. Considering Morton, Stephanie ordered more dishes that would appeal to most people's tastes. As the meal progressed, Stephanie noticed Morton barely touched his food. She looked up and asked, "Are these dishes not to your liking?" Morton was taken aback. "No, just finished a business dinner before coming here. Already ate." As he spoke, he pushed one of the dishes closer to Stephanie, changing the subject. "Looks like you'd prefer this one." Stephanie paused mid-bite, surprise flickering in her eyes as she instinctively asked, "How did you know? If I didn't even have this basic capability, I would have gone bankrupt long ago." Morton chuckled lightly, his eyes twinkling with amusement, as soon as she asked. She realized it was a silly question. She could simply observe which dishes Stephanie reached for most frequently. Though Morton spoke in jest, Stephanie felt an inexplicable pang in her heart. Even first-time dining companions could guess her favorite dishes, yet Jonas had never paid attention, never noticed even the slightest detail. She had never placed much importance on material desires, compared to so-called compensation afterward. She cared more about the emotional value in the present moment. Fortunately, she had completely ended this futile relationship. After dinner, Stephanie planned to stroll around nearby. She hadn't intended to trouble Morton, but he said returning too early would make it hard to explain to Morton's mom. During the half-day spent with Morton, he always took great care to consider her feelings. Stephanie began to realize that Morton wasn't as cold and unapproachable as she had initially thought. When she returned home in the evening, Morton drove her to her doorstep. Stephanie got out of the car and bid farewell to Morton. Just as she turned to head inside, she spotted Jonas standing at the door, his gaze fixed intently on Stephanie, then settled on the Bentley parked at the entrance, his eyes darkening. "Stephanie, who was the man who brought you home?" "Jonas, who I'm with is none of your business, is it?" Stephanie's icy gaze pierced Jonas to the core, jealousy burning like wildfire. As Stephanie ignored him and moved to step past, Jonas seized her wrist with a desperate grip, his voice hoarse. "Don't go, let go," Stephanie commanded coldly, wrenching her hand free. Jonas's eyes flickered with momentary guilt as he stepped forward only for a tall, imposing figure to cut sharply between them, his voice dripping with cold mockery. "She doesn't want to see you, can't you tell?" Morton's towering figure blocked Stephanie, his dark eyes sweeping coldly across Jonas's face. The atmosphere instantly froze. Stephanie looked up at Morton in astonishment, never expecting he hadn't left yet. From her vantage point, she could only see the man's tall, broad shoulders, his stern profile, and those faintly defined thin lips. "Who are you?" Jonas asked, his voice as cold as ice, eyes burning with furious crimson. "This is between me and my wife." "Wife," he said it so smoothly. Morton frowned, the term grated on his ears no matter how he heard it. Moments later, Morton looked down at Stephanie before his gaze finally settled on Jonas. Those beautiful peach blossom eyes curved slightly, the smile not reaching their depths. "I think you should clarify your position sooner rather than later." Stephanie's ex-husband. The words ex-husband seemed to hit Jonas right where it hurt. Biting, sarcastic words pricked at Jonas's heart like needles. Yet he found himself utterly unable to refute them, leaving him momentarily speechless. Jonas narrowed his eyes slightly, his hand hanging by his side clenched into a fist, his knuckles turning white from the force. Jealousy and rage intertwined, instantly consuming all his reason. He suddenly moved, grabbing Morton by the collar and slamming him against the hallway wall, a flash of ferocity in his eyes. "Say that again." Stephanie had never imagined Jonas would suddenly resort to violence. Nor had she ever seen him in such a furious state. "Jonas, stop." The moment the command left her lips, Jonas froze mid-motion, yet the fury in his heart burned fiercer. His gaze at Stephanie was tinged with unmistakable hurt. "You're defending him." Morton tilted his head to glance at Stephanie. Though Jonas had him by the collar, he showed no trace of disarray. Instead, he looked down at Jonas with icy disdain and let out a derisive snort. "If you cared so much about her, how did you end up becoming her ex-husband?" "Shut up." Jonas felt his heartstrings snap abruptly, as if pierced by something sharp, or scorched by raging flames. He suddenly threw a vicious punch toward Morton's face. Radiating terrifying coldness, Morton narrowed his eyes, raising his hand to firmly seize Jonas's wrist, preventing any further movement, then shoved Jonas away with brutal force. Jonas, however, was already blinded by rage and refused to back down. Stephanie felt her heart tighten. This was her first formal meeting with Morton. If Morton went back injured, she truly wouldn't be able to face anyone, let alone explain it to Stephanie's mom. Besides, such a scene would be utterly unseemly. She quickly stepped forward to grab Jonas's arm, pleading urgently. "Jonas, stop. Calm down." "I can't calm down," Jonas rasped, his voice hoarse as he stared down at Stephanie, his eyes bloodshot. "I never once thought about divorcing you, so what?" Stephanie retorted angrily and helplessly, glaring coldly at him. "Whether you like it or not, you and I are already divorced. Jonas, we're done. I don't want you disturbing my life anymore." Stephanie's chest heaved with fury, each word cutting into Jonas' heart like a knife. Jonas clenched his fists tightly, his voice seeming to be forced from his chest. "Stephanie, even if you don't want to be with me again now, you shouldn't just casually accept another man like this." "What did you say?" Jonas, his jaw tightened, the fury in his heart fueling his resentment as his voice rose sharply. "I said you shouldn't just casually accept another man's." Slap. A resounding slap struck him hard across the face. The empty corridor echoed with the sound. Stephanie, her right hand trembled slightly, her palm numb. She was furious, and the slap was delivered with full force. Jonas, whose face was knocked sideways, a red mark quickly rising on his pale cheek. Jonas, his gaze wavered, taking a long moment to regain composure. Clarity gradually returned to his eyes as he finally realized how harsh his words had been. His lips trembled as he murmured, "I'm sorry." "Get out," Stephanie said tonelessly, her voice icy. "I never want to see you again." Jonah's eyes glistened with unshed tears, panic spreading deep in his heart. Yet he couldn't utter a single word. Morton watched Stephanie's right hand hanging limply at her side and her slightly trembling body, a hidden flicker of heartache passing through his calm gaze. Stephanie looked at Jonas, her eyes filled with nothing but disappointment. "Who you end up with in the future has nothing to do with me, and likewise, who I end up with is none of your concern. Don't interfere with my life anymore. Don't make me repeat myself." Jonas looked up at her, his eyes even carrying a hint of pleading. "You're not leaving." Stephanie let out a light laugh. "Fine, then I'll go." Stephanie finished speaking and walked around him without hesitation. Not a trace of reluctance in her step. "No, I'll go." Jonas suddenly grabbed her wrist, only to release it with a sigh the moment Stephanie frowned. "I'll go." Jonas was afraid, terrified that if Stephanie left, he would once again be unable to find her anywhere. He never wanted to experience that feeling again. Jonas's gaze darkened as he trudged away with heavy steps. "Are you okay?" Morton glanced down at Stephanie beside him. Stephanie frowned slightly. "My hand hurts a bit." Morton chuckled softly. "As long as your heart doesn't ache, it's not worth it," he said in a calm voice, as if discussing something trivial. Stephanie paused for a moment before realizing he was concerned about her feelings. She smiled. "I've already let him go long ago, I'm just angry." Morton gave a quiet and glanced at his watch. "It's getting late. You should rest well." Stephanie nodded. Morton withdrew his gaze and turned to leave, but at that moment, Stephanie stopped him, saying softly, "I'm sorry about what happened today, and, thank you." Stephanie's voice was light yet sincere, and Morton's pale lips curved slightly in response. "You're welcome." In the evening, Morton returned to the villa. As soon as he pushed open the door, he saw Morton's mom sitting on the sofa talking on the phone, occasionally glancing at him and nodding with a smile. Morton was puzzled but didn't ask further. He was about to head upstairs to his room when suddenly Morton's mom called out to him, gesturing for him to come and sit down. Morton walked resignedly toward the living room. "Mom, what's up?" Morton's mom shot him a glance. "You still haven't told me whether you were satisfied with the match I arranged for you today. Her mother and I go way back. The girl is beautiful, has a good career, and is a wonderful person," Morton's mom said with a smile. "Since you came back so late, I assume you two got along well." Morton couldn't help but think of Stephanie. Their first meeting was on a plane where he saw her single-mindedly resuscitating a premature baby, persisting until her hands trembled without giving up. At that time, he merely remembered her face and gained a higher opinion of her. But tonight, he felt like he truly got to know Stephanie for the first time. As he was lost in thought, Morton's mom's persistent questioning echoed in his ears again. And he blurted out, "She's great." To his surprise, the next thing he heard was Morton's mom's delighted voice. "That's wonderful. Remember to bring her home to meet us in a couple of days." Morton frowned slightly before realizing, "Mom, she hasn't even agreed to date me yet." Morton's mom glanced at him. "So you can't even invite her over for a meal?" "That still depends on whether she's free and willing," Morton thought to himself. But in the entire household, the person he was least adept at handling was Morton's mom. "We'll see when the time comes," Morton replied ambiguously, standing up to return to his room. "I have a video conference with the company. I'll get to work first. You should rest early too, Mom." As soon as he finished speaking, Morton's mom was taken aback and about to scold him, but Morton had already gone upstairs, after returning to his room and finishing the video conference. Morton closed his laptop and couldn't help but recall the words Morton's mom had been nagging in his ear. The image of that slender yet resolute figure surfaced in my mind. No sooner had the thought arisen than Morton suppressed it, yet every time the two met or encountered each other, some unexpected situation would invariably occur. Morton's lips curved upward in an almost imperceptible smile. He didn't like surprises, but if it was Stephanie, he could probably make an exception. 1 week later, Stephanie brought gifts prepared half a month in advance to celebrate Novia's birthday. There were quite a few classmates at the gathering who had known each other since high school. During the meal, it was inevitable to ask about each other's recent situations. One friend was shocked to hear that Stephanie had gotten divorced. "You worked so hard to pursue Jonas and finally made it official. How could you two get divorced?" Novia clicked her tongue in annoyance. "We didn't interact much before. And I always thought Jonas was unattainable and flawless, but now that I've gotten to know him better, I realize he's just SOSO. The friends at the table immediately caught a whiff of gossip and eagerly asked what was going on. "Everyone knew how much you liked Jonas back then. How could you just up and divorce him now? I thought after being married for so long, you'd at least have a baby by now." Stephanie took a sip of her drink, noticing everyone's eyes on her. She sighed and only gave a vague response. "Actually, it's nothing much. We just simply lost our feelings for each other and couldn't continue." She didn't want to lay bare too many private matters for too many people to see. It wasn't just Jonas who would be embarrassed, but her as well. She didn't want to display any discord or unpleasantness in front of others. Fortunately, this topic was quickly replaced by amusing anecdotes from their school days. Everyone celebrated Novia's birthday together, temporarily forgetting all their unhappiness. By the end of the birthday party, Stephanie was quite drunk. In the evening, classmates around me were picked up one after another, and even those who hadn't been drinking drove home. Novia and another classmate supported Stephanie as they walked out. Having also drunk alcohol, none of them could drive, leaving them uncertain about how to get Stephanie home. "It's fine, no need to help, I'm not drunk, I can get back by myself." Stephanie's fair cheeks flushed slightly as she fumbled with her phone to hail a ride. "Are you safe to take a taxi in this state?" Novia asked with concern, hesitating about how to properly arrange things for her. Stephanie blinked with difficulty, looking at her phone screen. "I've already got a ride," with a faint smile. Fighting through her alcohol-hazed consciousness, she called the driver while replying to Novia. "It's fine, you don't need to see me off. Don't worry, I barely drank anything." The call connected, and Stephanie's voice carried a tipsy slur. "Hello, driver, where are you now? I'll be waiting for you at this exact location. Please don't come to the wrong place." After a long silence on the other end of the line, there came a faint sigh. "Where are you now?" Stephanie froze. That voice. It sounded somewhat familiar, but her chaotic thoughts couldn't place it immediately, and she replied, "I'm right here at the traffic light intersection. Can you see me? I'm wearing a blue dress." "Be more specific. Which intersection is it?" "It's exactly this pickup spot I've pinned." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, finally letting out a sigh that seemed to say, "What can you do?" "I'm Morton. Are you drunk?" "Morton." Stephanie frowned slightly, glanced at the number on her phone again, and her frozen brain finally began to sober up. "My apologies. I just came back from my best friend's birthday party, had some drinks, and dialed the wrong number." Morton paused briefly before asking, "Has the driver arrived yet?" Stephanie guessed, "Not yet. Maybe the distance is too far and they're still on the way," Morton said. "Then if you're on the phone with me, how will the driver contact you?" This time it was Stephanie's turn to fall silent. She chuckled awkwardly twice. "Right, how could I forget that?" Just as she was about to hang up, Morton's voice came through again. Don't hang up yet, check where the driver's location is now. His voice came through the phone, the deep tone sounding exceptionally gentle. Morton, I never knew you could be so gentle. There was a 2-second silence on the other end of the line, followed by a faint chuckle. I was afraid you'd pass out drunk by the roadside after hanging up. With no one to pick you up, if you woke up and saw this call record, you'd probably hold me accountable. Sure enough, this was the real Morton. Stephanie grumbled inwardly as she glanced at the estimated time on her phone, feeling somewhat despondent. Still another 10 minutes or so. Cancel the order. Morton paused briefly before saying directly, send me the address. I'll have someone pick you up, it's safer. Morton, there were occasional bits of noise on his end. As if he was busy outside too. No need. There's no need to trouble yourself like this. I'll just call another car. Stephanie felt too embarrassed to inconvenience him. In the end, it was Novia, who stayed by her side, that gave Morton the address for her. After hanging up the phone, Novia couldn't help but ask her, who was that person who answered your call just now? When did you meet them? How come I didn't know about this? 3 questions in a row left Stephanie struggling to respond. I remember telling you about this. Stephanie hiccuped drunkenly, squinting as she sat roadside with Novia. That blind date my mom set me up with last week. So it was him. 15 minutes later, a Maybach pulled over by the curb. Morton stepped out of the car and immediately spotted Stephanie in her aqua blue dress, resting her head on her hands as she obediently sat by the roadside with her friend, waiting for him. He strode over, glanced at the flushed and dazed Stephanie, then turned to the still sober Novia and said, I'll take you both home. Novia subtly sized up Morton before finally letting her guard down a little. She quickly waved her hand. No, it's fine. I can take a taxi myself. Just make sure she gets home safely. Morton didn't insist, nodding his head. All right then. I'll have her call you once she's home. Novia nodded in agreement, then left. Why are you here too? Stephanie looked at Morton, slightly surprised. Didn't you send someone to pick me up? After all, Morton seemed too busy to spare time every day. I was nearby, just passing by, Morton said flatly. Stephanie let out an "oh," then wobbled as she tried to stand up, but her high heel accidentally twisted, causing her to lose balance and fall straight onto the concrete ground. The next second, she fell into a warm and sturdy embrace. Be careful. Morton held her in his arms, his cool voice whispering by her ear, but as the world spun around her, Stephanie's head grew even dizzier. Unable to resist seeking something slightly cool to clear her mind, she unconsciously buried her face against Morton's bespoke suit-clad chest. The cool, smooth fabric of the suit made her unconsciously rub her alcohol-flushed cheek against it. Stop it, Morton said in a low, slightly hoarse voice as he lifted Stephanie steadily in a horizontal carry. Turning to head toward the car, the driver hastily opened the rear door for them to get in. Mr. Morton, shall we head to the villa or this young lady's home next? Morton hesitated briefly. Stephanie was heavily intoxicated. Even if she were sent home, there'd be no one to take care of her. Besides, Stephanie lived in a crowded area. If people saw him bringing her home drunk, it probably wouldn't reflect well on her. Morton made a quick decision and replied, to the villa. He paused, then remembered something. By the way, call Aunt Anne and have her prepare some hangover soup in advance. The driver nodded and closed the car door for them. Morton gently placed Stephanie on the seat and was about to straighten up to sit back. Stephanie's hand tightly gripped his tie, refusing to let go, forcing him to keep looking at her. Drunk Stephanie was far bolder than usual. Morton knew she wasn't fully sober, but he didn't forcefully pull his tie away, only softly reminding her, you've grabbed the wrong thing. Let go. Stephanie frowned slightly, seemingly displeased at being corrected. With a tug of her hand, Morton was pulled even closer. A pair of cool, profound peach blossom eyes gradually loomed larger before her. Stephanie held her breath for a moment. So handsome. Morton, his eyes narrowed slightly as his slender, well-proportioned fingers rapped against the privacy glass of the back seat. 2 crisp sounds. The driver wisely rolled up the windows and drew the curtains tight. Stephanie mumbled, Morton, I want to go home quickly. All right, he said softly, as if coaxing someone. Morton, I want to take off my high heels. I'm so tired. Okay. With one hand supporting her ankle, he clumsily yet carefully helped her remove the high heels. His broad palm could easily encircle her entire ankle, radiating scorching warmth. She was wearing a dress, albeit a long one, but Morton still draped a thin blanket over her. Morton, Morton remained silent. Under the dim interior light, his lowered lashes cast delicate shadows over his eyelids, his inscrutable emotions veiled beneath them. His features were striking, deep-set eyes, a straight nose, perfectly shaped lips, every contour so impeccably proportioned that anyone would instinctively look twice. Stephanie couldn't resist either. She cupped his face in her hands, tilting it left and right, admiring him like a masterpiece. The awestruck thought escaped her lips unbidden. Damn, how can someone be this unfairly good-looking? Morton, his Adam's apple bobbed as he caught her mischievous hand, his brow slightly furrowed with a sigh. You really shouldn't drink anymore. Do you even know your alcohol tolerance? Taking a cab while drunk is dangerous. Stephanie, her drunken gaze remained fixated on Morton's magnified, handsome face. Absolutely flawless. From appearance to personality, everything was impeccable. Though nothing was said outright and nothing was confirmed, she could sense that Morton cared about her feelings and was concerned for her safety. Perhaps their relationship could take a step further. But she had no idea what Morton truly thought in his heart. Stephanie's mind was in a daze, with tangled thoughts swirling inside. She wasn't really listening to what Morton was saying, only noticing his pale pink lips moving as he spoke. Stephanie lightly furrowed her delicate brows and pressed a finger against his lips. Morton, shish. The alcohol was getting to her as her slightly cool fingertip rested against his lips, gently and slowly caressing them. It really is soft. Morton's voice abruptly cut off, his pupils brimming with astonishment. Stephanie curved her lips into a smile. There, quiet now, just a light brush against his lips, and the noise in her ears fell silent. So simple. Morton paused slightly, lowered his gaze to look at her for a moment, then took her mischievous hand and sighed helplessly. You really are. The remaining words Morton left unspoken. Stephanie also grew uncharacteristically quiet, her eyes closed as if she had drifted off to sleep. The car stopped at the gates of the Mortons' family villa. Morton carefully lifted her out of the car, holding Stephanie's high heels with 2 fingers of one hand while cradling her in his arms with the other, walking steadily toward the house. His chest was broad, his arms firm, and the steady strength of his embrace brought a sense of security. Stephanie rested against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat with each breath. The faint scent of pine from him lingered at the tip of her nose. Seems even more drunk now. Stephanie tugged at his collar with her eyes closed, mumbling incoherently. So fragrant. Morton, you smell so good. It smelled wonderful. Her reason was possessed by alcohol, and without a second thought, the words spilled from her lips. Thus she didn't notice Morton's momentarily stiffened movement, only hearing his slightly hoarse voice speak calmly. Stop fooling around. Stephanie indeed settled down. When they reached the guest room, Morton placed her on the bed and pulled the covers over her. At this moment, Anton also brought over the prepared hangover soup. Leave it here. Morton sat by Stephanie's bedside, tilting his chin slightly. Anton paused for a moment before hurriedly responding, setting down the hangover soup and leaving promptly. Morton watched as Stephanie was about to drift off drowsily and spoke up. Drink this first, then sleep. You won't have a headache when you wake up. Stephanie lay on the bed, feeling uncomfortable all over. She groggily sat up and was about to throw off the blankets when Morton pressed her back down. Where do you think you're going? I want to take a shower. Stephanie might be drunk, but her subconscious habits remained. Going to bed without showering always made her feel unclean all over. Morton paused, then handed her the bowl, saying, drink this first, then you can shower. Stephanie glanced at him, clearly recognizing this wasn't negotiable, so she could only finish the hangover soup before heading to shower. After just a few steps, her stomach churned violently, and her vision blurred. She rushed into the bathroom, leaning over the sink as she emptied her stomach completely. Are you okay? Morton stood at the doorway, his calm voice tinged with concern. Stephanie shook her head and muttered that she was fine. The next second, she looked up and saw her reflection, hair disheveled, eye makeup smudged by tears from vomiting, a complete mess. Meeting the inquiring gaze of Morton standing not far away, something suddenly came up. Even the alcohol in her system seemed to sober up by half. I'm fine. I need to take a shower. Stephanie hurriedly lowered her head and pushed the person away, slamming the door shut with a bang before leaning against it, covering her face as she slid down to sit on the floor. Her image in front of Morton was utterly ruined tonight. Stephanie lingered in the bathroom for so long that Morton came knocking, thinking she'd fallen asleep in there. She had just turned off the water and was about to get dressed when she realized the dress she'd been wearing earlier was already ruined by her vomit. After an intense internal struggle, she finally spoke up awkwardly. I've soiled my clothes and don't have anything to change into. Could you help me order a delivery for a fresh set of clothes? There was no other way. She really couldn't bring herself to ask Morton for clothes. That was the only perfect solution her muddled mind could come up with at the moment. There was silence outside the door for a long moment before a sigh finally sounded. It's my fault, I didn't think it through. He paused, then added, wait here. Stephanie only heard his footsteps pacing back and forth, followed by 2 knocks on the door. She cracked the door open slightly, and a set of black and white garments was handed through the gap. Wear this for now, make do with it. Morton's deep voice sounded. The hand offering the clothes had its sleeve half-rolled, revealing a section of muscular forearm with pale skin where prominent blue veins were clearly visible. She stared blankly at the offered clothes and the hand holding them, seeing Stephanie hesitate to take them. Morton thought she might dislike wearing clothes previously worn by a man. He stood outside the door, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly as he added in a voice laced with barely detectable tension, "They're new, never been worn." Stephanie finally turned around, quickly took the clothes, and softly said thank you. After closing the door, Stephanie unfolded the clothes, a simple white short-sleeved top and a pair of athletic shorts. They looked like something Morton had bought for working out. The design was simple but the fabric was extremely comfortable, and the craftsmanship, fit, and logo clearly indicated they were expensive. Yet, Morton had given them to her to use as pajamas. Stephanie shook her head to dispel some wandering thoughts, quickly changed her clothes, and walked out, only to see Morton sitting on the sofa with his legs crossed, exuding an air of casual elegance as he flipped through a book with lowered eyes. "You haven't gone to sleep yet?" Stephanie asked instinctively upon seeing he hadn't returned to his room. Without looking up at the question, Morton replied, "I was afraid you'd fallen asleep in the bathroom again. No one would come to fish you out if you slept there all night." Stephanie choked, unsure whether she was more irritated, embarrassed, or still feeling the effects of the alcohol. Words she'd normally only think to herself slipped out. "Mr. Morton. Do you actually have any friends when you talk like this all the time? Such a pretty mouth, if only it couldn't speak." Morton finally looked up, and the moment his gaze landed on Stephanie, he paused briefly, his eyes narrowing slightly. Even at his height of 188 centimeters, the clothes were still too big on Stephanie. Watching Stephanie walk out of the bathroom in his clothes, an indescribable feeling welled up inexplicably in his heart. Morton's eyes twinkled with amusement as he closed the book and set it aside, appearing utterly unfazed by her accusation. "I don't need many friends." It felt like punching cotton. Stephanie immediately gave up on him, flopping onto the bed and burying herself under the blankets. Her muffled voice emerged from the covers. "Suit yourself." I need to rest now," Morton hummed in acknowledgement. "Then rest well. Don't forget to call your friend first." Only after Morton left and the room fell silent did Stephanie peek out from under the blankets. Remembering Morton's words, she pulled out her phone and called Novia to let her know she was safe. After chatting briefly and hanging up, the room fell quiet again. Stephanie lay on the bed, her head starting to spin as a wave of exhaustion washed over her. The pillow and blanket carried a comforting fragrance, and that night, Stephanie slept unusually soundly. The next day, warm sunlight brushed her cheeks as the discomfort of a hangover crept in. Stephanie struggled to open her eyes and glanced at her phone. It was almost noon. In an instant, Stephanie snapped wide awake. She had already missed the hospital's working hours. Battling dizziness, she hurriedly got up to wash up, only to find several dishes laid out on the dining table. When she opened the door, a familiar figure was bustling about in the kitchen when she suddenly froze. Morton would still cook personally. Inside the kitchen, slender, clean hands dimmed the lights of the open kitchen. Morton lowered his head to carefully wash and dry his hands. He brought out the final dish, only to see Stephanie standing there dazed, staring blankly at him. "What are you standing there for? Come and eat." Stephanie finally snapped out of it and quickly waved her hands. "No need. I have to hurry back and change now. I'm late for work." As she spoke and was about to leave, Morton called out to stop her. "It's Sunday today. Aren't you on your day off?" Stephanie immediately halted her steps and slowly turned around. She looked down at the date on her phone, which clearly displayed Sunday. No wonder she hadn't received a single call despite being so late for work. She immediately breathed a sigh of relief, then belatedly tried to cover her embarrassment with a light chuckle. Morton curved his lips slightly upward as he arranged the dishes, speaking in a cheerful tone. "So, can we finally sit down and eat in peace now?" Stephanie sat down awkwardly with her head lowered, gazing at the table full of well-presented dishes. On the dining table lay 4 exquisite porcelain plates, along with a freshly served dish of Longjing tea-infused shrimp, its aroma and colors perfectly balanced, while the overhead light cast a warm and brilliant glow. All Stephanie's favorite dishes. She hesitated before speaking. "You did all this yourself?" Morton glanced at her as if to say, "Obviously, I rarely do it, but that doesn't mean I can't." Morton served her a dish. "Try it." Stephanie lowered her head to take a bite, her eyes lighting up in surprise. The taste was unexpectedly good. "It's delicious. But, are just the two of us eating?" Morton curled his lips slightly. "Yeah. My parents went traveling abroad. I gave the housekeeper the day off today." Stephanie nodded and focused on eating without looking up. After finishing the meal, Morton handed Stephanie an exquisitely wrapped box. "Open it and see if it fits." Stephanie opened it to reveal a white satin gown. the sunlight gliding over its surface like liquid pearls. I don't need to look to know it must be expensive, and I wonder when Morton prepared this. I wasn't sure what style you'd like. And with time being tight, I just had someone pick one at random to send over. Although Morton said so, the careful packaging of the clothes spoke for itself. This isn't. Before she could finish her polite refusal, Morton spoke up as if he had anticipated it. If you don't take it, no one here can wear it. Stephanie remained silent for a moment before softly expressing her thanks. You don't always have to thank me. Morton's voice was calm. Stephanie looked up at his moon-cold handsome face, yet warmth surged through her heart. However, Morton's next words were, just make sure next time you're drunk. You don't dial the wrong number and mistake me for your ride-hailing driver again. He sat on the sofa handling work on his computer, the screen's cold light casting on his sharply defined features. The slight curve at the corner of his lips softened his usual sternness. Stephanie rubbed her forehead and said helplessly, that was just an accident. I won't drink that much next time, and I won't dial the wrong number again. Stephanie apologized. I caused you trouble this time. Let me treat you to dinner when we meet next. Morton finally looked up from his computer, glanced at her, and said with thin lips, I don't mind the trouble. Stephanie was startled, not reacting immediately. What? A soft sigh escaped. Morton's deep, pleasant voice sounded once more. If it's you, then it's no trouble. Morton disliked unplanned surprises and detested any form of inconvenience. Yet every time, he made an exception for Stephanie. When he realized this, he also saw clearly into his own heart. Stephanie remained silent. In the quiet, she could almost hear the accelerated rhythm of her own heartbeat. Morton noticed her silence and casually shifted the topic, asking as if by chance, if that call yesterday hadn't been mistakenly made to me, but to anyone else, would you have gone with them too? How could that be? Stephanie refuted instinctively, only to freeze when she caught the triumphant glint in Morton's eyes. Good. Morton closed his laptop and turned to Stephanie, suddenly remembering something. That person, your ex-husband, is he still bothering you? Stephanie was stunned for a moment before shaking her head and saying, not recently. Ever since that day he left, Jonas hadn't contacted her again. If it weren't for Morton bringing it up this time, she might not have even thought of him. Morton asked again, what if he suddenly comes back later, begging on his knees for forgiveness? Doing everything to win you back. Will you get back together with him? Stephanie frowned and said flatly, that would only make me more annoyed. Stephanie was never one to look back easily. Once something is broken, it's broken. No matter how you mend it, it will never be exactly the same as before. Morton smiled even more deeply. If someone else wanted to pursue you now, would you refuse? Stephanie gazed at the narrow, smiling corners of his eyes, sensing he was like a bewitching fox, luring its prey step by step into the trap. She smiled faintly and spoke softly. It depends. If it's someone I dislike, of course I'd refuse. Morton looked up, gazing at Stephanie before him, his eyes deep as still water. His Adam's apple bobbed before he finally spoke. Then, do you dislike me? His cool voice carried a barely perceptible tension, his heart equally unsettled. Stephanie pretended not to understand. Mr. Morton, what exactly do you mean by that? Gazing at the sly smile in the woman's eyes, Morton chuckled softly, gripping Stephanie's slender wrist and pulling her down, drawing her entire body into his embrace. Stephanie found herself abruptly straddling his lap, her hands flustered as they braced against Morton's shoulders, his warm breath brushing close to her ear. Don't ask what I mean, just answer me. He didn't expose her feigned ignorance, instead murmuring softly as he repeated the question. Do you hate me? Over and over. The same question, do you hate me? Yet his voice was so tender it might as well have been asking, do you like me? Stephanie felt her ears grow warm as she struggled to calm the surging emotions in her heart. I don't dislike it. Is that so? That's enough. Morton looked up at her, their eyes meeting, and Stephanie seemed to read the unspoken love in his gaze. Stephanie, would you be willing to try being with me? Morton's voice echoed in her ears. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink in her eyes, leaving only this pair of mesmerizing gazes before her. Okay. Morton, his gaze flickered, the hand at her waist moving to cradle the back of her head. He tilted his head slightly, planting a gentle kiss at the corner of her lips. Half a month later, at the city hospital, Stephanie in her white coat was making rounds through the wards when sudden commotion erupted in the corridor. Several nurses were pushing a stretcher bed carrying a pregnant woman from the ambulance toward the operating room. MS. Stephanie, this pregnant woman is experiencing sudden bleeding. The situation is very critical. She needs immediate surgery. Stephanie quickly inquired about the patient's condition and immediately furrowed her brow. Get her to the operating room immediately and prepare for a cesarean section. Upon entering the operating room, it became clear the patient's condition was indeed dire. with the fetus at constant risk of asphyxiation. The laboring woman was nearly drenched in sweat, her voice trembling as she asked weakly, "Doctor, what's wrong with my baby?" Stephanie paused before answering truthfully. "The fetus is oxygen deprived and at risk of suffocation at any moment," she quickly asked. "This situation requires family consent. Where are your family members?" The woman pressed her pale lips together, suppressing a cry of pain in her throat, her eyes rimmed red. "I came alone. I have no family." Stephanie, though she didn't fully understand, she could tell the woman had unspeakable difficulties, perhaps recalling her own moments of similar isolation and helplessness. After only a brief hesitation, she said, "Then you sign it yourself." Supporting the trembling, weakened hand of the laboring mother, she helped her write her own name, though the handwriting trembled beyond recognition. The power to choose and shape one's destiny erupted within her heart at this very moment. Fortunately, the surgery proceeded smoothly, the child was safely delivered, and both mother and baby were doing well. Stephanie had just stepped out of the operating room when she spotted the two family members arriving belatedly. "Doctor, how is my wife?" one of the men asked urgently. "Has the baby been born? Is it a boy?" Another older woman also inquired, "Is the child healthy?" "It would be even better if it's a boy." Stephanie listened to their relentless questions, her brow furrowing deeper with each one. They weren't by her side during the most dangerous and difficult moments of childbirth. Yet the first thing they cared about was the baby's gender. She didn't answer their questions, but instead asked, "Where were you when the mother was being taken into the operating room? And where did you go when the family's signature was needed?" Her anger was evident, and her tone wasn't particularly pleasant either. The woman immediately took offense but, constrained by the fact that she was speaking to a doctor, suppressed her irritation and retorted defensively. "Her younger sister slit her wrists at home, so my son and I rushed her to emergency care first. Is there a problem with that?" "Of course not," Stephanie sneered, turning her gaze to the man. "But between the two of you, couldn't one of you have stayed with the mother in labor? Do you know she almost died on the operating table just now? And what kind of husband have you been?" The man froze, clearly unaware of the situation, his face instantly flooded with shame. Stephanie didn't know what conflicts existed in their family, but no matter what, a woman in labor should never have to give birth alone. When the woman heard Stephanie accuse her son, she immediately exploded. "What are you saying about my son? He's a husband, but does that mean he can't also be a brother? His sister slit her wrist and nearly died. He was so worried he didn't notice. What's wrong with that? Besides, what's the big deal about her having a baby? When I had children, I wasn't as delicate as her, needing someone to watch over me. Besides, which do you think is more important, your own sister or an outsider who married into the family?" The woman kept hurling accusations, and the crowd gathering around them grew larger. The man, wanting to avoid trouble, pulled at her and tried to calm her down, but she only grew angrier, pointing at Stephanie and shouting, "You, a doctor, know nothing and blame my son. Apologize to him right now." Stephanie watched her tantrum calmly, smiling instead of getting angry. "Auntie, I don't apologize to people. I deliver babies. Would your son like one?" I'm going to report you. I'll file a complaint against you." The woman clutched her chest in agitation, raising her voice. "My son is a top lawyer. You'd better watch out or I'll have him sue you." The woman had always taken pride in her son, and relying on his professional status made her feel invincible, even to the point of making threats. After all, most ordinary people prefer to avoid any entanglement with lawyers and certainly don't want to get involved in lawsuits. In daily life, people usually gave in to her demands, which only made her grow increasingly arrogant and overbearing. Yet Stephanie showed not a trace of fear upon hearing this, her tone even turning indifferent. "As you wish." She was merely stating facts, so there was truly nothing to fear. Stephanie looked at the husband and mother-in-law of the woman in labor before her, feeling nothing but a chill for her sake, since both the mother and baby were now stable. She couldn't bear to look at the two people before her for another second. With that, she tried to step around them and leave, but the woman grabbed her sleeve, refusing to let go. "If you don't apologize to my son today, don't even think about walking away." "Absolutely not." Stephanie turned her head, smiling as she pulled her hand back. "Was I wrong? If the mother hadn't made it off the operating table today, it would have been your negligence. And all you cared about was whether the baby was a boy. Did you ever consider how the mother felt? Have you fulfilled your duty as a husband? What nonsense are you talking? Who allowed you to speak about my son like that?" The woman flew into a rage, raising her hand high to slap Stephanie across the face. Stephanie instead grabbed her wrist and shoved it back. The woman clearly hadn't expected Stephanie to be so unyielding, nor that she'd be no match for the younger Stephanie's strength. Stumbling backward, the man quickly steadied the older woman, shooting a reproachful look at Stephanie. "You're a doctor, how could you lay hands on my mother?" Stephanie clearly wasn't buying into the moral coercion. Should doctors just swallow their pride and stand there taking a slap for no reason? The man was left speechless. But the woman grew even more furious. She lunged forward, her nails flailing wildly as she aimed to scratch Stephanie's face. The situation looked too overwhelming to handle. Just then, a tall and upright figure suddenly appeared, shielding Stephanie from harm. Stephanie stared at the man's broad back before her, utterly astonished. "Jonas, what are you doing here?" The man's towering shadow loomed over the woman as he glared down at her with undisguised hostility. "Lay another finger on her," he warned, "and I won't be held responsible for what happens next." He wasn't wearing a white coat, clearly not one of the hospital's doctors, and therefore had no professional reservations about handling patients or their relatives. The moment she met the man's icy gaze, the previously aggressive woman's demeanor instantly deflated. Jonas looked at the two of them, his words falling like hammer blows, radiating an intimidating chill. "You both know who's right and who's wrong. It'd be best if you don't trouble her again," faced with such a tall, imposing man. The woman didn't dare say another word, only nodding resentfully. Jonas then turned and led Stephanie away. Stephanie frowned, struggling to pull her hand free, but Jonas held on too tightly. It wasn't until they turned the corner of the hallway and reached a stairwell that Stephanie finally managed to shake off his grip. "What are you doing?" Jonas looked at Stephanie, none of the icy sternness he'd shown earlier when facing the mother and son pair remaining in his expression. After a long silence, he finally spoke hoarsely. "Stephanie, I want to pursue you again. This time I won't let you be the only one giving. Before he could finish, Stephanie had already lost patience and interrupted him calmly. "Sorry, you're too late. I already have a boyfriend." Jonas was momentarily stunned. "What?" He stared incredulously into Stephanie's eyes, as if searching for the slightest hint of deception. "You're lying to me, aren't you? You just wanted to find someone to make me jealous, didn't you?" Stephanie listened to his self-deceiving questions without answering, calmly watching as his eyes gradually turned bloodshot. Jonas gradually confirmed the answer from her silence. She hadn't lied to him, there really was someone else. "Is it that man who took you home that day?" His voice tightened, unwilling to believe that Stephanie's eyes no longer held his reflection. "Do you really not love me anymore?" He had always believed that as long as he took the initiative to pursue her and was willing to make sacrifices for her, she would surely forgive him. After all, from beginning to end, he had never considered divorcing her. He wanted to build a home of their own. Yes. Stephanie looked at the person she had once passionately adored in her youth, now standing before her in humble supplication, yet not a ripple of emotion stirred in her eyes. "I already have someone I love deeply now. And he loves me just as much. Why him?" Jonah's originally calm breathing became rapid. "Because he would care about me." Since their relationship was confirmed, Morton, as usual, would bring her flowers every time they met formally. No matter how busy he was, he would always find time to reply to her messages, never leaving her emotions unacknowledged. Occasionally when he traveled abroad for business, even with the time difference in a foreign land, he would still call to ask about what had happened to Stephanie while he was away. Even for ordinary social engagements, he would always bring Stephanie gifts and surprises upon returning. Sometimes it was a late-night snack or a bouquet of flowers, sometimes a haute couture bag or jewelry, and other times a kitten picked up from the roadside. Things she casually mentioned liking would often be delivered to her hands the very next day. Such attentiveness and importance were things Jonas had never given her. Just because of this, Jonas slowly clenched his hand hanging by his side, his inner resentment reaching its peak. "Stephanie, I can change everything from the past. I'll care about you more than he does. I'll do better than him." Stephanie coolly frowned and cut him off. "You're not him, and you could never be better than him. Jonas, if I'd known you never truly let go of Phyllis in your heart, I would never have married you from the start. I did love you, but from the moment you repeatedly chose Phyllis, my love for you was completely exhausted. You have the freedom to pursue true love, but you shouldn't cling to the warmth of home while still holding on to the love in your heart." Jonas's eyes dimmed with each word from Stephanie, his heart sinking into an abyss with no bottom in sight. Stephanie's voice remained calm, her eyes unreadable. "Jonas, I'd rather remember our relationship at its best than look back and spend the rest of my life seeing these ugly conflicts and barriers between us. I'll never forgive you either. Don't come looking for me again. When you do, it just makes me sick. Still, thank you for helping me out earlier. I also wish you and Phyllis a happy ending together." A single sentence seemed to completely shatter Jonas's long-fortified defenses, tearing his heart apart and crushing it. Stephanie finished speaking without another glance at him, turning away resolutely. It was as if she had completely walked out of his world, leaving him alone to dwell in past memories, trapped in fantasies of domestic bliss with Stephanie, tormented by regret. Stephanie returned to the doctor's office with a lightened heart after clarifying everything with Jonas. Ding dong. The phone notification sounded. It was a message from Morton. Just finished a meeting, no overtime tonight. I'll pick you up for dinner. Stephanie looked at her phone screen, the corners of her lips curling slightly as she replied, okay, I'll wait for you. After replying to Morton's message, Stephanie slipped her phone back into her white coat pocket and headed straight to her rounds. The new mother had already been taken back to the ward. The first thing she did upon waking was resolutely file for divorce, demanding not only the property rightfully owed to her but also insisting on keeping the child she had given birth to. She would leave nothing behind for this heartless family, just like Stephanie, who left nothing for Jonas but memories. Half a year later, after that incident at the hospital, Jonas never appeared before Stephanie again, and in the end, he and Phyllis never became a couple. Stephanie saw news about Phyllis again when it trended in local news. Raising a child is no small expense. Phyllis demanded child support from her ex-husband but failed, only to discover through testing that the child she bore was not his. Now she's being sued by her ex-husband, who's demanding the return of the divorce settlement he previously gave her. In the end, with no other options left, she had to beg Jonas for help, after being turned away at his door. She actually went to make a scene at the entrance of China Southern Airlines. The incident was recorded by many bystanders and uploaded online, creating quite an ugly spectacle. Jonas had no choice but to resign from China Southern Airlines and eventually left the country. Before going abroad, he sent one last message to Stephanie from an unknown number. I will love you forever. In a lifetime of regret, Stephanie silently read the text, then deleted and blocked the sender without hesitation. What are you looking at? Weren't you going to shower? Morton had just finished an international meeting in his study when he saw Stephanie, who had claimed she was heading to the shower 15 minutes ago, still sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. Morton sat beside her, pulled her into his arms, and held her firmly with an air of confession brings leniency, resistance brings severity as he demanded, all right, which little man is texting to flirt with you this time? The demeanor of a mistress in the position of a wife. Nothing, just a spam message. Morton raised an eyebrow slightly, his narrow eyes exuding a bewitching charm. Oh, I don't believe it. You'll have to tell me in detail what kind of spam message it was. He suddenly scooped up Stephanie in his arms and strode steadily toward the bathroom. Time flew by swiftly. Through the cycle of 4 seasons, Stephanie accompanied Morton to his birthplace, Paris, France. Morton held her hand as they retraced the paths of his childhood, visiting familiar places and leaving behind footprints of their journey together. After a day full of continuous surprises, Morton took Stephanie to a white church. Stephanie pushed open the wooden carved doors with both hands. The empty church opened before her, revealing a floor adorned with prearranged flowers and candles, while stained glass refracted dazzlingly brilliant light. For a moment, Stephanie stood frozen in place. Is today some kind of anniversary? I just wanted to give you a perfect day. Nothing to do with anniversaries. It's already perfect. Nothing could be more perfect. Stephanie felt her eyes grow warm, but this time not from sadness. That's all it takes to satisfy you. Morton looked down at her with a faint smile. There should still be one more thing to make it truly perfect. With that, he took out a ring, held Stephanie's hand, and slowly knelt down on one knee. Starting today, it could also mark the beginning of one of our anniversaries. The end.